very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Tuesday, the 19th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Miriam Cates.
Farmers' fury. Thousands of farmers from across the country have descended on London, rallying against the planned family farm tax raid. Farmers may have to sell up farms that have been with their families for generations, thanks to vast new death duties. We're live on the ground with all the action. This is the stage where Jeremy Clarkson will be giving his speech imminently. We're there live.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is 6,000 miles away in sunny Brazil. It's day 2 of the World Leaders G20 Summit. So what does Sir Keir Starmer have to say about these farmer protests and his cozying up to China? Well, we'll be sitting down with him to ask precisely those questions later in the programme.
And back at home, many parts of the UK have woken up to snow this morning, as the Met Office says the country is getting its first taste of winter. Is it an early white Christmas where you are? It really is a day all about the farmers, about the people who produce the food in this country that we eat, that we need to survive. And frankly, there's a big question of survival for these family farms.
That's right. There seems to be an extraordinary misunderstanding in Whitehall and from the government about how farms actually work. And of course, if you have a huge inheritance tax bill and therefore have to sell a whole load of fields, your farm can no longer make money. It's no longer a business and it'll be bought by somebody who perhaps doesn't want to farm it.
And this is the big concern, that does Whitehall, do these politicians, do these civil servants understand just how thin, just how razor-thin the margins are on so many of these farms? Yes, they sit on lots of land, but my goodness me, they've had a torrid few years of it. I mean, there's been bad harvests, there's been bad weather. They are barely making enough to keep their farms
and
solvent.
the costs of farming, whether that's fertiliser, farm machinery, of course, wages will now go up because of minimum wage, national insurance changes affect them too. As you say, the margins are so tight, and the idea that on their death, their children may have to pay hundreds of thousands or even millions of pounds in order to be able to inherit their farm is just ridiculous.
And it seems so stark when this is a country where you can trace back the lineage of these farms for generation after generation after generation. Are we really going to be able to live with ourselves if we're the first generation that says, actually, no, we're going to stop that history. We're going to rip up that farm for the sake of what is, quite frankly, a rounding error of tax receipts?
Well, it almost seems like it's Whitehall being blind to how farming actually works, because they've sat down and seen on paper that these people have a lot of assets. They might on paper have assets worth millions of pounds. But of course, that's completely different to having millions of pounds in the bank, which could fund a luxury lifestyle, and people might agree should be taxed. Having millions of pounds in fields and agricultural equipment does not make you rich. And yet they've believed that these people can be taxed.
Well, stay with us here on GB News and do get in touch. gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved in the conversation. All of that to come, including we're expecting a speech from Jeremy Clarkson soon, after your headlines with Tatiana.
Tom, thank you. The top stories. Farming leaders have accused the Chancellor of refusing to engage with them over controversial changes to inheritance tax as thousands of farmers march on Westminster. First unveiled in Rachel Reeves' budget, the plans to impose inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million have sparked fury among rural communities who've contested the government's assertion that small family farms will not be impacted by the changes. The president of the National Farmers Union says Labour has destroyed a contract between farming and the government dating back to the Second World War with its changes to inheritance tax. Environment Secretary Steve Reid says due to inheriting a £22 million black hole from the previous government, Labour had no choice.
This government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. But we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances, otherwise we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Well, speaking at the protests in Westminster this morning, Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Victoria Atkins, says the impact on farmers will be huge.
The real-life impacts of this are enormous, because we know already around kitchen tables in farms up and down the country, farmers have got advice from their accountants, from their business advisors, and they are deeply, deeply worried and distressed that if older members of the family live past March 2026 when this change comes in, then they are faced with an enormous inheritance tax bill when that dear beloved relative passes on. And when I say, you know, huge bills, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds, possibly even over £1 million.
Breaking news this hour, a getaway driver who helped 4 teenagers killed 2 boys with machetes during a case of mistaken identity has been jailed for life for murder and will serve a minimum of 38 years in prison. 45-year-old Anthony Snook drove 18-year-old Riley Tolliver and boys aged 15, 16 and 17 to and from Knoll West in Bristol, where they murdered Mason Wrist and Max Dixon. 15-year-old Mason and 16-year-old Max died from stab wounds after being chased by the 4 armed teenagers in January this year. Well, Tolliver and the 3 boys, who can't be named for legal reasons, had been driven to and from Knoll West by Snook as part of a revenge mission. In other news, the Defence Secretary says allies must come together to back Ukraine and ensure Vladimir Putin does not succeed. That's as Britain announced further military aid for Kyiv on day 1,000 of the war. The Ministry of Defence says the UK will provide £7.5 million for new attack and surveillance drones. This also comes amid concerns about a potential change of US stance under US President-elect Donald Trump, who says he wants to end the conflict in a day. The £7.5 million will be invested through the drone coalition, with other allies providing an additional £16 million, including 10 from Germany, £3 million from Canada and 3 from Luxembourg. Meanwhile, Russia has been ramping up its rhetoric after the US President Joe Biden yesterday gave the green light to Kyiv to use US-supplied long-range missiles to strike inside Russia, while Russia says it's changed nuclear policy as Moscow signals anger over that decision. They've also said the use of such missiles by Ukraine will lead to an appropriate and tangible response. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer said that Ukraine is #1 on his agenda at the G20 summit in Brazil, which began yesterday, and he vowed to double down on support for Ukraine. And almost 200 schools have been closed in England and Wales, and new weather warnings issued as snow has hit part of the country. Thousands of train passengers are also suffering disruption due to severe weather. By 11 o'clock this morning, around 64 out of a total of 120 services planned by East Midlands Railway were reportedly cancelled or delayed by at least an hour and a half. There are currently 3 yellow warnings in place for snow and ice in northern Scotland, northern England and parts of Northern Ireland, the Midlands and North East Wales. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 12. And now, of course, today all eyes are on Westminster because in a planned protest today, farmers have descended on the capital. Yes, planned changes to inheritance tax rules, what's being dubbed the family farm tax, has set farmers off. They're all gathering en masse in London in order to try and force the government to change course, accusing Keir Starmer's administration of betraying them.
Of course, just to recap, before the budget changes, almost all farmers could pass on their farm in its entirety to their children and grandchildren without paying inheritance tax. It's called agricultural property relief, and it was in recognition of the fact that you need an intact farm in order to be able to farm and produce food. But following the changes in the budget, an awful lot of farms, basically all farms that aren't small, are going to be caught by inheritance tax, giving farmers this awful dilemma of what they do anything before they die in order to provide for their children with these huge inheritance tax bills. But we're watching now a stage where we believe that Jeremy Clarkson is going to soon address the rally, and he is attending despite recently undergoing life-saving heart surgery. So we hope to bring you Jeremy Clarkson. Of course, he's been fundamental in educating people about how farming works and how difficult it is.
Absolutely. But earlier on, we heard from the government. The Environment Secretary was asked whether the government has betrayed farmers, as the National Farming Union has claimed. Here's what he had to say.
Well, we inherited a £22 billion black hole from the previous government, and the previous Chancellor of the Exchequer covered the scale of that problem up. So none of us knew how difficult the problem would be when we were coming into government. But this government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. But we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances. Otherwise, we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Of course, those numbers are contested by the National Farmers Union. There seems to be a lot of disagreement over just how many family farms will end up paying this death tax.
And of course, the reason that the Labour Party say they've introduced this is because so they claim that lots of people, wealthy people, are buying land in order to avoid inheritance tax. So the idea would be you're somebody very wealthy, you put your money into agricultural land, which means on your death, your children escape inheritance tax. Now, that may well be a problem, and it certainly does seem to happen in some cases. But I would have 2 questions. Firstly, if they're buying that land and it is then farmed, whether by them or somebody else, what's the problem? It's being farmed to produce food. Why shouldn't they be treated like other farmers? But also, if it is a case and it is a big problem, surely it's easy to apply some sort of test about whether this is a real farm or whether money's just being put here to avoid tax. That would not seem to be very difficult to do.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be beyond the wit of man to suggest that if, for example, a farm is passed on through with no inheritance tax and then sold, within a time period, you could then apply a tax.
Exactly.
Or, for example, if this farm hasn't been owned by the same family for a certain number of generations, there are lots of ways you could do this without being quite so punitive towards some of those family farmers.
And there are already some restrictions. So, for example, if you own a farmhouse that's worth a lot of money and the person who lives in it is not farming, let's say you rent it out or it's someone who's not farming the land, then that doesn't count in your relief. You would have to pay inheritance tax on it if it exceeded the thresholds. So there are already checks and balances there to make sure that the relief falls to farmers and not just to people who happen to own the land. So it seemed like a relatively fair system that's certainly been in place for decades before this change.
And of course it was in place because farmers are desperately important to our not only food security, but I think also sense of nationhood. I mean, these people are not just producing food, they also steward the landscapes. They take care of the land. And what is it? It's something like 95% of this country isn't built on.
Yeah.
The rolling fields and the hedgerows and those pictures that you think of when you think of England are maintained and curated by our farmers as well.
I think it's an example of how the left seem to want to put a monetary value on everything. And so they look at this land and think, well, it's worth X amount of money, therefore we can tax it. But of course, there are many other ways to value things other than just money. And like you say, the historical value of this, the emotional value of a farm to a family that's farmed it for generations, the link between the past and the future, the fact that we need food for security. What other reason really is there to have land apart from to produce food for the nation? And so just because it's worth £4 million, £5 million on paper does not mean it's the same kind of asset as if you happen to own, a whole load of houses that you rent out, or you've got a few £1 million in the bank. It's a completely different value.
And people really do value the tradition and, frankly, the animal welfare that is put into some of these smaller farms. I mean, we all know that you can buy cheaper eggs that are not free range, or you can buy slightly more expensive eggs that are free range. And a huge proportion of people choose to do the latter, just as people choose to get superior products from these family-owned farms, perhaps going to local farm shops in their communities. I mean, this stuff really matters. And I think the British people get this, that sometimes, people are willing to pay a bit more for a superior product. And that's something that feeds into this idea of the bottom pennies not sort of registering with the government.
That's right. And increasing numbers of farms are diversifying, so not just producing the food, not just farming the land, having livestock, but also offering extra services. So whether that's visits, whether that's... There was a farm in the constituency when I was an MP who had a vending machine that sold fresh milk 24 hours a day. Those kind of things that just bring in the extra cash, because, of course, farming, the margins are so tiny. I think Clarkson's farm, in that first year of farming, I can't remember, he made a profit of something like £84. I mean, it's so tight.
During the general election, I visited a farm in Lewis, which had turned a portion of its farm into a campsite for families. And so while we were walking around, there were families that were being taught about the farm, that were going and seeing the chickens, holding the chickens even, and it was an educational experience for them, as well as being an active farm that was producing food for everyone. But the extraordinary thing, talking to the farmer on that farm, was just how much trouble she had been through trying to erect a barn because of the planning regulations, trying to lay a farm track, trying to get approval for a campsite. All of these barriers that the government has put in the way at every single step, when all these farmers are doing is trying to raise a livelihood. And that was before this change to inheritance tax. That was before this new tax was imposed. I mean, there are lots of taxing things the government did about preventing people from building on their own land. But now they're taking money as well. It's extraordinary.
That's right, and I think people accept that farmers have always battled against the odds, whether that's weather conditions changing and the price of crops changing. Of course, it's always been a risky business, but now there's a sense that they are fighting against our institutions and our law as well. And in recent years, all the subsidies that were so important for producing food have moved towards a kind of reward for environmental schemes that may have some merit, but aren't about producing food at the end of the day. And so you've seen farmers paid to plant trees but not grow crops, reinstate hedges but not provide food. And the £5 billion that the Chancellor announced in the budget as help for farmers is just a continuation of those schemes. It was money that's already expected for environment, land management schemes. It's not actually going to help farmers to compensate for this new inheritance tax.
Absolutely. Well, as we've been saying, we're expecting Jeremy Clarkson to address the rally and all of those farmers later this hour. Should we take a little look about him arriving in Westminster a little earlier today?
No, I'm here to support the farmers. It's that simple. So they need all the help they can get, really.
Yeah.
Even from me.
Even from you, what's that?
Well, I mean, you take help from wherever you can get it, really, don't you?
Yeah. But you oppose what the government's proposing?
Oh, God, yes.
Goodness me.
Yes, Jeremy Clarkson there, who, of course, has made the plight of farmers well known to people across Britain with his very popular programme, where you see really the highs and lows of farming, not just the weather, not just the financial costs, but also the emotional toll that it takes on farmers when animals die, when crops don't produce their yields. Such a hard job. I think anyone who's sat down and watched that series, Clarkson's Farm, will have seen the passion that this man has for this vocation, really. I mean, it's not a job, it's a vocation. Yeah. And also all the people that work on his farm, who you sort of get this sort of really close... you feel like you're close to them. And their lives and what they're going through. And of course, Jeremy Clarkson didn't have to be here today. He's a wealthy man. He's been a television presenter for God knows how many years and all the rest of it. And he had a heart operation just days ago. But despite all that, he feels like he has to be there with the farmers today because this matters. I think that's why farming has such a place in people's hearts, because people realise that farmers are not doing this for the money, they're doing it for the love, and many of them would be better off if they sold up, let their land be developed for housing and went into some other business or lived off the profits. But the reason that they don't is because they do value the land and the heritage, and they have such an emotional tie to the land, and I think that's why they get so much sympathy. You know, it's not that other business people don't also deserve praise, but this is a different kind of business that's just much more, people have much more sympathy for. Now, of course, all sorts of people are down there at the protest today. We're going to have a look now at Nigel Farage arriving just some moments ago.
Sort them out, Nigel! It needs something, doesn't it? Nigel.
Quite the response there from Nigel Farage.
And the politics of this are really interesting because, firstly, this wasn't in Labour's manifesto, so people didn't vote for it. That's absolutely clear. All the other parties oppose it, including the Liberal Democrats, and we now have Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, on stage addressing the farmers.
So much better! The Liberal Democrats will be standing up for farmers because you have really got a case here. This really matters. Hello! You are the ones that put food on the table. You are...
Wait. Do you need another medic? Yes, OK. Can we get another medic, please? Can we get another medic? Can you see it's over by the statue? I should know who that is.
There seems to be a bit of a problem with a member of the audience, and they're looking for a medic, but we'll keep an eye on this and, of course, come back to Ed Davey when he starts to speak again. Of course, it's quite cold in Westminster.
It is a bit. I did actually buy a pair of gloves this morning because I didn't bring any with me. We also saw Tim Farron there on the stage, who's MP in Cumbria, another Liberal Democrat MP, lots and lots of farmers in his constituency. He's been very vocal opposing this move. But, of course, politically, in terms of from Parliament's point of view, there's nothing that can be done. Labour have such a big majority. I think we can return now to Ed Davey, who's taken the stage once more.
Environment. And it's been so incredibly difficult for farming for so long. You've had to face rising energy bills, rising fertiliser bills, feed bills. Then you've had the botched transition from the basic payment scheme. Then you've had trade deals that prevent you from selling your produce into Europe but allow Australian and New Zealand farmers to undercut you here. And that's all before some of the worst weather and flooding in generations. You have had it hard, and this government doesn't seem to realise that.
And that was Ed Davey talking there about some of the problems that farmers are facing. But of course, this protest today mainly on that idea that family farms could be taxed for the first time in decades. Families not being able to pass those farms on from one generation to the next.
Well, we'll be sticking with the farmers during the show, and you're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up today after the break.
Indeed, the Prime Minister is in Brazil, 6,000 miles away. It's day 2 of the World Leaders G20 Summit. We'll be bringing you our interview. We have sat down with the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. That'll be later in the programme.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, let's speak now to Sales Director at Savills for Quinta Properties, Raquel Santos, who is live for us in Portugal. Raquel, good to see you this morning. Why are all these celebrities flocking to Portugal all of a sudden?
Yeah, I guess it's just because of basically the great lifestyle that we have, security, you know. Portugal has kind of been a hidden, tucked away gem for quite a while that people didn't realize existed. And with the international flights that, with the American flights coming in, it's kind of been put back on the map as a country that's worth visiting and worth investing in due to the secure investments that we offer in real estate.
Raquel, is it anything to do with tax rates? Because I think capital gains tax is, I think if it's over a certain amount, you pay half of your rate, which is 28%. Capital gains on shares and cryptocurrencies is 0. Is it anything to do with that? Because over here in the UK, big storm at the moment about millionaires apparently leaving in exodus because of the mooted increases in taxes in just a few weeks.
Yes, so obviously the alterations that are happening with the UK in terms of the tax that's being implemented on the capital gains, as you mentioned, we've definitely noticed has become a big drive, mostly on the vendor side as well, who are looking to sell because they don't want to be hit, with these higher capital gains, which is close to coming into effect.
Raquel, have you noticed then millionaires, high net worth people from the UK getting in touch with you looking to relocate?
Definitely. It's for multiple reasons, obviously, the changes that are due to come into place, obviously, and Portugal just seems to be a safe option always when things do kind of change. People opt to come into Portugal because we're quite steady, we're quite stable.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them. They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 27 minutes past midday. Now, in a planned protest, I beg your pardon, in a protest at planned changes to inheritance tax rules, what's being known as the family farm tax, farmers and politicians are gathering en masse in London to try and force the government to change course, accusing Sir Keir Starmer's administration of betraying them.
Well, among the speakers addressing the rally is Jeremy Clarkson, who is attending despite recently undergoing a life-saving heart operation.
Well, we'll keep an eye on this stage here where different speakers will be popping up throughout the afternoon, but we can go live now and speak to our GB News political correspondent, Catherine Forster, because, Catherine, this is a big political headache for the government.
Yes, it certainly is. And good afternoon, Tom and Miriam. I was out in Westminster a little bit earlier. It is absolutely freezing, and it was also chucking it down. But of course, bad weather is nothing to farmers.
I'm going to have to interrupt
They are
you.
used to being out in the
the
cold.
leader of the Conservative Party has taken to the stage. Let's listen in.
It's cruel, it is unfair, and it is going to destroy farming as we know it. And that is why we will, at the very first opportunity, reverse the family farms tax. I have here with me Victoria Atkins and Robbie Moore. They are the shadow ministers who are watching what the Department for the Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs is doing. They're watching the Treasury. We are the team that are working for you. We know the burden that farmers are carrying. A lot of people think that farming is just a business. It is not just a business. It is a way of life. It is about family. It is about the land. It is about the environment. It is about our food. We cannot survive without you. I want you to know that we have your backs. We are all, and Neil is here too, Neil Hudson. We are all MPs who have rural constituents. We cover the rural communities. We know what farming is like. We understand that you have no certainty. We know that bad weather, a bad harvest could put you out of business. We know that you are buffeted every day by what happens all around the world. We know that you need protection. We understand that you have been doing this all your lives, that without you, we cannot eat. We understand the burden that farmers carry, not just for yourselves, but for the whole country. We understand how difficult it is when you're negotiating with supermarkets. We understand how difficult it is when you're looking at prices for fertilizer. We know what you are dealing with, and that is why we know how this tax will destroy your way of life, and that is why we are going to reverse it. But I want you all, thank you, I want you all to know this, that farming in this country is absolutely critical for growth. And it is also about the hope that we give to young people. I have a lot of young farmers in my constituency. Victoria, Robbie and Neil do too. We speak to them and they are worried. They don't want to have to pay inheritance tax and be paying off to the Treasury for 20, 30 years before they even start making a profit. They will leave farming, and if we don't have a next generation, there will be no future. So I want to say to all the young farmers out there, to all the young people out there, we are going to look after you. We are going to make sure that you have a future. We are doing this for you. It is not about us. This is about you. This is about making sure that your way of life continues, that our way of life continues. Farming is the backbone of this country. Without it, we cannot survive. We know that we haven't always got it right, but this policy is so obviously unfair, so obviously cruel. We will do everything we can to make sure that in a few years' time, if they do not U-turn now, we will reverse this tax. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Kemi. Big cheer for Kemi Badenoch!
Well, there was the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, speaking to cheering farmers there, of course, saying that if her party is elected at the next election, they will reverse this tax.
Indeed, and I think Reform, Liberal Democrats all agree, very united in opposition. The interesting politics here is in the Labour Party, because obviously the government ministers, the cabinet are sticking to the line that this needs to happen, that this is part of filling the putative £22 billion black hole. But I wonder what the backbenchers are feeling, particularly those of the agricultural constituents. Well, I think we may have a big star next.
Yes, bigger than any of the politicians. Perhaps the person that everyone has come to this rally to hear most from. It sounds like we might be getting the introduction now. It sounds like we're not getting Jeremy Clarkson just yet. We're keeping you on your toes because, of course, this is such a important issue, as we've heard from all the politicians that have spoken so far. And I think that is why this is going to be a bigger headache than the new government had perhaps anticipated. They thought this would be a small group of people and that they probably wouldn't be all that noisy. Yeah. They could be sort of squeezed for cash and no one would mind. But actually, I think they're learning that farmers are some of the most sympathetic people in the country.
And also, if you think about this from the Cabinet point of view, from Rachel Reeves' point of view, she was probably advised by her civil servants that this would only affect a small number of farms. I think the government official figures are just a tiny percentage of farms. So if you were told that, as an incoming government minister, that this will affect a tiny proportion of farmers, you probably think, OK, it will be worth the grief. What they didn't realise is the way that the farmers have calculated who's going to be affected is entirely different, and actually a huge number of farms, even small and medium-sized farms, will be affected by this. So I do wonder if this is, at its root, a simple miscalculation, misunderstanding of the number of people that it will affect, and that they're absolutely shocked by the reaction.
And indeed, has the dam started to break on this? Of course, the farmers have been questioning these numbers that the government came up with, and so have the opposition politicians. But today we learn that a Labour MP is now asking the government these questions, wanting clarification on just how many farms this new tax will affect. Terry Jeremy, who's the new Labour MP for South West Norfolk, is a rural constituency. Perhaps he wasn't expecting to win his seat. He was the Labour MP who defeated Liz Truss in her seat. And now he is standing up and saying, hang on, have the government got their own numbers right? And Miriam, I'm sure you'll remember whenever there was a scandal under Boris Johnson, the government could usually survive it until and unless a member of the governing party almost broke that dam of party unity. Could we be starting to see that here with the Labour ranks?
Well, I think that's a really good question, because of course you would expect the Conservatives, Reform, the Liberal Democrats to oppose this. They are the opposition. That's not unexpected. That is their job to do it. But as you say, the power of the government, the power of Keir Starmer and the Cabinet rests on whether their backbenchers are with them. And of course you can have the odd person speaking out, but it's whether it seems like momentum is gathering. And look at some of these new Labour backbenchers. For the first time ever, Labour is representing a lot of rural seats. That hasn't happened before. But also they're sitting on wafer-thin majorities, 1,000, 2,000. And they will be being bombarded in their constituency surgeries, when they're out and about in their constituencies, by farmers who are really, really up in arms about this change that wasn't in the manifesto. And of course, that's coming off the back of the outrage over the scrapping of the winter fuel allowance. And so these new MPs have spent a couple of months now being bombarded, and they will be certainly thinking about, is now the time to signal in public, not just through their whips, but in public, that they are not happy with what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating dynamic, because amongst the cabinet and the senior ranks of Labour politicians, they're the people who've been in Parliament for several general elections' time. And if we remember back just to the last general election, you had the smallest number of Labour MPs since the 1920s, since 1924. Or was it 1934? I think it was 1936. Anyway,
a while ago.
Around 100 years ago. And so what you have is a cabinet built of people who represent the heartlands of Labour seats, the urban heartlands, the centre of cities, and then you have a lot of these other MPs who for the first time have rural constituencies, but they're nowhere near power. They're the backbenchers.
Exactly, a very difficult position to be in. Well, we're going to stick with the politics of this situation now and cross again to our GB News political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, I think you're in our Westminster studio, but the politics of this are fascinating, aren't they? Because in theory, the Labour government is holding firm on this. They are determined to push ahead with what they see as a vital tax-raising exercise. But how do you perceive the reaction of backbenchers? Are they starting to buckle under the pressure?
Well, certainly Labour have a number of new MPs representing rural constituencies, something which wasn't very common before the election in the summer. And I think many of them will be very worried because of this has gone down incredibly badly in rural communities, and many of those Labour MPs hold these seats by very, very, very slim margins. So I've been out and about in Westminster this morning. Westminster is utterly transformed. It is bitterly, bitterly cold. It's been chucking it down with rain, but hundreds of farmers going to a meeting with the NFU president, Tom Bradshaw. I'm going to hand back to you now because it looks like Jeremy Clarkson is about to speak.
Yes, Catherine, thank you very much for that. We're going to just dip into the audio now and listen to what's happening on stage in front of us.
Right. Now, Jeremy, I hope you don't mind me saying this, Jeremy's had a bit of a bad back recently, so it has actually been a serious deal for him to get here today. Now, remember how loudly you cheered when we were trying to get number 11 to know you were here. I know you've got some horns out there. 1, 2, 3, cheer!
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Ollie. Hello, everybody. You're right, I'm not supposed to be here, I'm not supposed to be talking, but we've got a few things to say, and I'm going to start with a bit of honesty. I lived in London 25, 30 years, and when I was here, like a lot of people who live in cities and go on Twitter, I thought farmers drove around in Range Rovers, moaning, until February, and then you all went skiing. And then about 5 years ago, I started farming. And I've come to understand just how unbelievably difficult it is, and complicated, and dangerous, and cold. Very cold. Even when we're harvesting, it's cold. And it's just the forest of costs that staggered me. £200,000. Somebody needs to turn their mics off. £200,000.
We need a medic.
Medic.
We need a medic to the right.
We have a medic over to
by the building.
Building doesn't narrow it down, Ollie. I'm going to say
to the right of the stage.
To the north of the stage at 3 o'clock. Okay, so, as we all know, everyone down there, you know a tractor. £200,000 for a medium-sized one. A combine, £500,000. All the equipment costs a fortune. And if you try to price what you're selling to accommodate that, there's just a lot of moaning. You get people saying, well, I shouldn't pay that. I can get a chicken from abroad. Yeah, you can. But it's so full of chlorine, it tastes like a swimming pool with a beak. And then you've got the environmentalists endlessly shouting at you, oh, your cows, they're altering the composition of the gases in the upper atmosphere, and your fertilizers ruining the trouty freshness of our streams and rivers. And I know sometimes you just think, well, what's the point? We're just trying to make breakfast, lunch and dinner, and it's just this endless whinging and there's no money in it. And the regulations. Some of you down there will know what I'm on about when I say we got a lot of GS4 this year on the farm. And we were told, oh, the sheep will love that. No, they don't. They're standing looking at it in the same way that a 5-year-old looks at an olive. They don't want to eat it. And so we have all of this complication and all of this cost. And there's very, very little money in it. Very little money, as you know. And then we got the budget. Now, I know a lot of people all across the country in all walks of life took a bit of a kick on the shin with that budget. You lot got a knee in the nuts and a light hammer blow to the back of the head. Because we had pickup trucks, double cab pickup trucks, being reclassified as company cars. 211% tax rise there. £50 carbon tax on a bag of fertiliser. The basic farm payments altered in such a way that we're getting a lot less than we thought we were going to get. And then there was the inheritance tax business. Honestly, I don't know where to start. I know you've heard a lot about it today, and I'm not going to dwell on that. I will just say this. Rachel Reeves has told us, what is it, 72% of farms are going to be unaffected by this. I've just been interviewed by Victoria Derbyshire for Newsnight. Let's see if we can educate her here, if she's still around, Victoria. How many people here, if you'd raise your hands, are from a family farm? I want to see, right. I hope you can see that. I hope we've got our cameras from the show up high to see. That's a lot of hands. Now, keep them up, and I want you to lower them if you think, and you've had time to work this out, you think you're going to be unaffected by the changes to APR and BPR. Put your hands down if you're going to be unaffected. Thank you. My case rests. I want Newsnight to see that. She was trotting out. Nobody's affected. Rachel Reeves says so. Since when was the BBC the mouthpiece of this infernal government? I've got to get the brakes on. The trouble is I'm off my tits on codeine and paracetamol up here. I don't know what I'm saying. But I do want to finish, if I may, with a message to the government. I do. Not a shouty one, it's this. For the sake of everybody here, and for all the farmers who are stuck at home today, paralysed by a fog of despair over what's been foisted upon them, I beg of the government to be big, to accept that this was rushed through, it wasn't thought out, and it's a mistake. That's the big thing to do, admit it, and back down. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. All right, everybody, Ollie's just asked me to ask you if you could all turn around now, because we'd like to get a photograph of the size of this protest. The camera's somewhere down near the cenotaph there. Hold up your placards, hold up your banners. Let's get a picture of this. And thank you once again, everybody. And thank you, Ollie. And thank you, Emily. And thank you, everybody who's put this amazing thing together at very short notice.
Thank you, Jeremy, as well. And also, last night at the Peppa Pig Awards, he won an award. So I think you should all give him a round of applause for that as well. Right, the next speaker is called Laurie.
Well, we had Jeremy Clarkson there, of course, the unlikely hero of British farming following his successful series over the last few years. And we do just want to apologise to viewers for some slightly fruity language there in typical Jeremy Clarkson style.
Yes, I think he was referring to some passerine birds.
Indeed. Very common on British farms.
Absolutely.
And as he said, he is on strong medication because he has had a heart operation and has a bad back, so he's made a big effort to come to the protest today.
Now, of course, he's been referring to the size of the crowds there, stretching right from Parliament Square down to the cenotaph. We're going to get you some pictures of just how big the crowds are. I apologise that our cameras are fixed on the stage. Of course, very important to listen to what is being said here, but we will get you some shots of those crowds too. This has been an enormous day and a loud voice from those farmers here in London. But of course, farmers up and down the country are also enraged. Not every farmer, of course, has been able to make it down to London today. So why don't we cross over to our reporter, Will Hollis, who is elsewhere for us. Oh, no, sorry, Will is in London for us. Will, what's the scene where you are?
Good morning. Good afternoon, actually, I should say. So we're in the middle of Parliament Square, where traffic is completely stopped and police have blocked the roads to make way for the thousands of protesters that are in London today. It's important to recognise that while you say Jeremy Clarkson has become the unlikely hero of this protest, there are thousands of farmers that have worked for their lifetimes in farming from around the country that have descended on Parliament today. A few moments ago, there were hundreds of children on those small tractors, and they did a circle of Parliament Square. A couple of the people who are here, who've come all the way from Wiltshire, are Will and Jodie. Will, you're a family farmer, and Jodie, you work for Will. Just describe for me, what does it mean to you that this inheritance tax is coming in as a family farmer?
Well, it means, you know, there's a risk of losing the farm, having to sell massive acreage of the farm and being unable to carry on with what we're doing, really.
And is that your parents' farm, a family farm?
Yes, family farm. It's me and my dad and my mum. We do it, and yeah, it's, you know, it's bad news for us, really.
What's the arrangement? Has there always been an unspoken or spoken agreement that one day you'll take over the farm?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always, you know, that's what we do it for. That's why my dad's still doing it. He's 60, he was up this morning at 4 a.m. and he does it really for me and to keep the legacy of the farm going. My grandpa was a farmer, that's all he wanted to do, and that's all we want to do really, is carry on farming.
There are thousands of farmers right now here in Parliament Square. Many of them fear that they won't be able to carry on, or they'll have a serious effect. What do you feel about inheritance tax and the other things in the budget which aren't being spoken about so much, and what it might mean for your future as an inheriting farmer?
Well, like I said, it means we're going to have to sell a massive acreage of the farm and unable to carry on. And yeah.
Let's talk to Jodie, who works for you. Jodie, as an employee, so maybe not somebody that would be inheriting the family farm, what does it mean for you that there's fears about where you work and other workplaces where you might go as a farmer?
I feel that a lot of places will all have problems with this inheritance tax, and I've worked for the family farm for 10 years. My son's only just turned 11, and I'd like him to be brought up. He's all he's known, and I don't think that's going to happen if this continues.
There are thousands of farmers here, including Jodie and Will from Wiltshire. Thank you so much. Let's give you a little bit of a flavour quickly. If we just take a bit of a walk. So you can see, as I say, there are hundreds of police, thousands of police here alongside the thousands of farmers. Just a little bit further down, you can see that there are children on these tractors that I was describing. I think it's really important to show that it's not just one generation of farmers that are here. There are generations 3, 4 and 5 of them. Let's take a little bit of a look over here, actually, because I think this fella's going to come in and say hello. Can we say hello to him? Fantastic. Hello. How are you doing? It says Henry, born to farm. Fantastic. Henry, what do you think of being down here today?
Good.
It's good. You feel good? It's a little bit cold and wet, though. What do you think about farming?
Good.
It's good. And who's this that you're with? Is this Mum?
I'm Auntie Angela, who's a farmer.
Auntie Angela, who's a farmer. Yep. Why is it so important to have children down here at this farming protest where there are thousands of lifelong farmers?
Because it's all about the children. Effectively, it's all about securing food from the next generation who will be producing food, learning skills off their parents, learning all about farming. Farming, you can't just pick it up. It's you're born into farming, you learn about farming, and then that farm that you've been taught on, that you learn to know about, you learn how to produce the maximum amount of food from, then becomes their farm, and then it's a legacy that they go on to do the same.
We've heard a lot of the arguments about why people don't want this inheritance tax. But as I say, there are 10,000 farmers or so here. How does it feel as one farmer to be around so many others that have the same view?
It's a shame that we're here, but it's also an honour to be here. I feel like I'm part of something special. We've had 2 horrific years on the farm, really stressful. I finished combining last week, which says how bad this year's weather has been. And then with the budget announcements on top of that, we sort of got to the point where I felt like we needed a release, and for me this is a release to keep reading about and talking about all of these madness in the Labour budget. We've now got an opportunity to come out here and actually tell people how we feel in a really positive, I feel, in a really happy environment.
Auntie Angela, thank you so much. And do you want to say something for the camera, for the TV?
Hiya.
Fantastic. Just like me when I was a little boy. Middle of Parliament Square, just underneath Big Ben, and I don't think the rain is going to stop anything that's happening today.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you so much. We're live there in and amongst the action.
What a gorgeous little boy. I do hope he gets to farm. I just find this very moving, actually, that after almost a year now of protests that have not been anywhere near as popular in terms of representing the public mood, we now have a protest in the heart of London, in the heart of our democracy, for something that the vast majority of people in this country can feel very strongly. It's incredible to see all those farmers there, wearing very different attire to some of the previous protests that we've seen.
And, of course, this protest is a legal protest. They have a stage there, they've registered with the authorities, they've got amplification, they're not lying down in front of cars, they're not gluing themselves to railings, they are making their voices heard in a legal and orderly way. If only more protests behaved like our farmers.
Yes, it is. It's a good day for democracy, even though it is a very bad day for farming. So, of course, just to recap, this is a protest about the new rules on inheritance tax. Before the budget, it was the case that most family farms could be passed over in their entirety to the next generation. Now it looks like a lot of farms, perhaps even most farms, may be impacted by this huge change, which could see family farms being broken up and never farmed again.
Yeah, that's the crucial point. When you've got margins as thin as farmers work with, having to give up 20% of their farms can just make that farm no longer viable as a family business, as a family farm.
And of course, it hasn't been an easy time for British farming, that lady said about the weather, but also for a long time now, all the winds have been against farming, whether that's prices, because supermarkets drive down the prices, a focus on environmental controls rather than food production. Lots and lots of things have kind of conspired against farming, and this is the latest in a long line.
And of course, we'll keep across all of the happenings in Westminster throughout this programme. This is Good Afternoon Britain here on GB News. Plenty more to come. Do not go anywhere.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. From the Met Office, here's your latest GB News weather update on this cold but fairly sunny day for many of us. There was some heavy rain, sleet, snow that caused some disruption overnight. Most of that is now clearing away towards the east because the low pressure centre that brought that unsettled weather is pushing away. But there is a front lying across us, and that is bringing some rain, perhaps a little bit of sleet or snow across central southern parts as we go through this afternoon. Further north, a good deal of sunshine around, but watch out for some further wintry showers, some sleet and snow showers piling into northern parts of Scotland. We have Arctic air plunging its way down across the country, and so it is going to feel cold, especially with some strong winds making it feel below freezing for some places. You'll definitely want to wrap up. As we head towards this evening, and the wintry showers across northern parts of Scotland, they will continue. We could see accumulations of snow building up and some icy patches causing some disruption here. Clearer skies, a bit drier further south, but also some wintry showers pushing into northern parts of Northern Ireland and down the eastern side of England as well. Could also be some icy patches here. Across southern parts of England, it's going to be a cloudier end to the day here. Some further outbreaks of rain for a time, but the clearer skies will spread their way southwards. The cloud will clear away. So for many of us overnight, it is going to be largely dry with some lengthy clear spells. And as a result, under those clear skies, away from coastal areas, it really is going to be another chilly night. Could be colder than last night, -10, -11, possibly even as low as -12 Celsius. So a harsh frost to add to the icy patches that some places will see where we've had any wintry showers overnight. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, it's a bright sunny day for many of us. Still the chance of these wintry showers in areas exposed to those northerly winds, so watch out for those. But again, despite the sunshine, it is going to feel cold. Winds perhaps a little bit lighter than today, but still chilly.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Her name is synonymous with fashion. Karen Millen, the high street designer whose dresses have been worn by some of the world's most famous women, including the Princess of Wales.
Yes, but in a recent Daily Mail interview conducted by our showbiz juggernaut, as I call her, Steph Tetchy, 63-year-old Karen confessed she isn't immune from worries about her appearance.
Well, this summer, Karen took the plunge with a £35,000 facelift using the very latest surgical techniques. Now, to hear more of her story, we're delighted to be joined by Karen herself and consultant plastic surgeon Dr. Tunç Tiryaki, co-founder of the London Regenerative Institute. So, how did you two get together?
That was a meeting at the Parliament, wasn't it?
It was, actually, yeah, through mutual friends, really.
So you already knew of Tunç and you knew his expertise. How did you come to the decision to kind of go ahead with this? I was reading the Mail article and apparently one day you looked in the mirror. And I've heard this story so many times before,
yeah, I know, from
not least my mum and my nan, and they said they looked in the mirror and thought, goodness me.
I know. I think it's that menopausal thing when suddenly things just change. And, yeah, for me, it was coming out of lockdown almost, where I was probably on the back end of menopause, and I just, suddenly looked in the mirror and it was like, oh, my God, what's happened to me?
Because I guess you still, I mean, for me, I'm 35, I still feel like a 20-year-old or even an 18-year-old. Does that change as you get into sort of your...
Unfortunately not, right?
Well, it does change to a certain extent, but, you know, I've always looked after myself, so I've always kept fit and looked after my skin. So, you know, it did come as a bit of a shock. I mean, I know, obviously, ageing happens to us all and we have to embrace that, but there's a certain amount that we have to put up with and then, you know, other things can step in.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the 19th of November. I'm Miriam Cates.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Well, farmers' fury. Thousands of farmers from across Britain are in London rallying against the planned changes to inheritance tax rules for farms.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is in Brazil. It's day 2 of the World Leaders G20 Summit. We'll be bringing you our interview with Sir Keir Starmer later in this programme. What does he have to say about those farmers' protests?
And back at home, many parts of the UK have woken up to snow, as the Met Office says the country is getting its first taste of winter.
This is a big day in Westminster. There's no doubt that a message is being sent, and the only question is, will the politicians be listening?
Yes, it's going to be very interesting to see how the government reacts to this, because, of course, they can't ignore this number of protesters and also many Labour MPs now representing rural constituencies with lots of farmers and lots of people who work in rural businesses. So the question is, will any cracks show? And we've already identified 1 or 2 Labour backbenchers who've come out and started to question the new inheritance tax. Will that trickle up into government?
Well, there are some estimates out from the Met Police I've been reading that up to 10,000 farmers are in Westminster today. We heard the huge cheers from farmers reacting to those speeches on that stage set up in Whitehall. And, of course, some farmers have brought their farming, their tractors and other vehicles as well into the heart of Westminster.
It's quite extraordinary that we've got this number of people because, as we've been saying, farmers work incredibly hard. Some of these people will have been up at the crack of dawn, milking, tending to animals before coming to London. The fact that the farmers have taken their time to come down to London shows just how seriously they're taken. Of course, farmers don't normally make a fuss. This was originally just an action day organised by the NFU, but turned into a protest by other farmers that care passionately about this issue.
Absolutely, and we're going to be live throughout the programme, catching up with what is going on in Westminster and, of course, also that crucial interview with the Prime Minister. Will he be budging on this new death tax for farmers?
Well, please do send your comments in to us throughout the programme. We'll be reading some of those out. gbnews.com/your say, and we'll be reading those out throughout the programme. But first of all, we have your news headlines with Tatiana.
Miriam, thank you. The top story. Well, farming leaders have accused the Chancellor of refusing to engage with them over controversial changes to inheritance tax as thousands of farmers march on Westminster. First unveiled in Rachel Reeves' budget, the plans to impose inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million have sparked fury among rural communities who've contested the government's assertion that small family farms won't be impacted by the changes. The president of the National Farmers Union says Labour has destroyed a contract between farming and the government dating back to the Second World War with its changes to inheritance tax. Environment Secretary Steve Reed says Labour had no choice.
This government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. But we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances. Otherwise, we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
However, speaking at the protests in Westminster this morning, Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Victoria Atkins says the impact on farmers will be huge.
And the real-life impacts of this are enormous because we know already around kitchen tables in farms up and down the country, farmers have got advice from their accountants, from their business advisors, and they are deeply, deeply worried and distressed that if older members of the family live past March 2026 when this change comes in, then they are faced with an enormous inheritance tax bill when that dear beloved relative passes on. And when I say, you know, huge bills, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds, possibly even over £1 million.
Television presenter and journalist Jeremy Clarkson said Rachel Reeves had used a blunderbuss to hit farmers.
If she'd have wanted to take out the likes of James Dyson and investment bankers and so on, she would have used a sniper's rifle. But she's used a blunderbuss and she's hit all this lot. It was, as I understand it, it was a very rushed last-minute decision. And I think, you know, we all make mistakes in life, and I think it's time for them to say, you know what, we've cocked this one up a bit and back down. That's my view.
Breaking news coming into us this hour. Russia says Ukraine fired US-supplied long-range missiles into the country for the first time today. The Ministry of Defence in Moscow says Ukraine used the Army tactical missile system in a strike on Russia's Bryansk region this morning. Ukraine hasn't commented yet. Now, this comes after the US President Joe Biden yesterday gave the green light to Kyiv to use US-supplied long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. Russia says it's changed nuclear policy as Moscow signals anger over that decision. Downing Street has responded today, saying Putin's decision to raise the issue of nuclear weapons again is the latest example of irresponsibility, he said. He also said from the depraved Russian government. Sir Keir Starmer has said Ukraine is #1 on his agenda at the G20 summit in Brazil, which began yesterday, as he vowed to double down on support for Ukraine. A getaway driver who helped 4 teenagers kill 2 boys with machetes during a case of mistaken identity has been jailed for life for murder and will serve a minimum of 38 years in prison. 45-year-old Anthony Snook drove 18-year-old Riley Tolliver and boys aged 15, 16 and 17 to and from Knoll West in Bristol, where they murdered Mason Rist and Max Dixon. 15-year-old Mason and 16-year-old Max died from stab wounds after being chased by the 4 armed teenagers in January this year. Tolliver and the 3 boys, who can't be named for legal reasons, had been driven to and from Knoll West by Snook as part of a revenge mission. And almost 200 schools have closed in England and Wales, and new weather warnings issued as snow hits parts of the UK. Thousands of train passengers are also suffering disruption due to the severe weather. By 11 o'clock this morning, around 64 out of a total of 120 services planned by East Midlands Railway were reportedly cancelled or delayed by at least half an hour. There are currently 3 yellow warnings in place for snow and ice in northern Scotland, northern England and parts of Northern Ireland, the Midlands and North East Wales. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 1. Now, in a mass protest at planned changes to inheritance tax rules, farmers are gathering en masse in London in order to try and force the government to change course, trying to get them to abandon this new family farm death tax, accusing Sir Keir Starmer's government of betraying them.
Well, amongst the speakers addressing the crowd is Jeremy Clarkson, who has attended despite recently undergoing a life-saving heart operation.
Well, let's return to our intrepid reporter on the ground, Adam Cherry. He's in Westminster for us. Adam, what's the mood there?
Yeah, afternoon, guys. Well, first of all, the farmers have brought the weather with them, but we don't mind that. The speeches have just wrapped up. There are still thousands of people here on Whitehall, but they are clearing out, heading towards Parliament Square and Trafalgar Square. Now, I'm joined by 3 farmers today. Chaps, this is Paul, James and Rob. First of all, chaps, where have you come from today?
We've come down from Lincolnshire.
Lincolnshire. Tell us a little bit about your farm and why you're here today.
Yeah, we farm sheep and arable in the Lincolnshire Wolds and up near the Humber. We've come down today to support the cause amongst the other farmers because we couldn't stay at home and let somebody do our job for us.
And we heard lots of speeches today, from Jeremy Clarkson, of course, Kemi Badenoch, Ed Davey. What's your overall impression of the speeches? Let's talk about the politicians first, because they're the ones making the decisions here. What did you think of Kemi Badenoch and Ed Davey's speeches?
I think they've been pretty well briefed on what the problems are in farming, but there's a multitude of problems behind the headline one, which seems to be IHT. But there's a lot to digest.
I'm going to bring you guys in. Let's ask about Jeremy Clarkson's speech. What did you make of Jeremy? Are you excited to see him today, guys?
Yeah, he's good. He's done a lot for farming with his Clarkson's Farm Show. Highly recommend. But he's helped outline the problems what we all face.
Let's bring you in.
Well, I think he has done an excellent job because he said in his speech that having lived in London for 25 years, he's actually realised what the job is that we do. It's not all money, it's not all what it's all made out to be. It's blooming hard work.
Exactly, that's the message I think everyone at home will take from this today. It's a lot of hard work, especially when the weather's like this. Chaps, thanks for joining us. Safe travels home. Thanks for joining us on GB News. There you have it, guys. As I say, they've brought the weather with them, but we're having a good time here. The speeches. I will say, I thought that the response to Kemi Badenoch and Ed Davey was a little bit. Well, the crowd went mild. I wouldn't say they were overjoyed to hear them, but Jeremy Clarkson was like a rock star, as you heard from these guys. What he's done for the farming community is huge in bringing a spotlight on this. He was the man to see today, I think.
Of course, Adam, one of your guests there just referred to this being the tip of the iceberg, this inheritance tax, of course, very distressing to farmers, but actually comes off the back of many, many hard years for farming, perhaps a chronic failure of Westminster to understand farming, whether that's changes to environmental rules, difficulties with Brexit, all these other things. Do you get the sense that farmers feel that they've generally been treated badly by politicians, not just the latest incumbents?
Yeah, Mira, I think that's fair to say. It's not just this budget, it's not just this government. Yes, there is a sort of a feeling of successive failures, and that might explain why the politicians here today weren't received particularly well. Of course, Nigel Farage was here, and he wasn't able to give a speech. It was just Ed Davey and Kemi Badenoch and a couple of others. But the response to him was more warm. I think that's fair to say. But overall, the point stands. Yes, this is not just a tale of one budget. It's a tale of strife and of hard work and successive governments not necessarily paying enough attention to it. That's what I get. That's the impression I get speaking to people today, this afternoon.
And Adam, I've got to ask you, while you're there, you can see these farmers out and about on Whitehall. Has anyone decided to glue themselves to the road? Has anyone tied themselves to some railings? Has anyone smashed any windows, thrown paint on private property? I mean, what's the tale of destruction that you can see before you?
So no one gluing themselves to the road, no one smashing anything up. There are a lot of tractors. I can see them behind me. The camera won't be able to pan around it at the moment, but just a few moments ago there were some tractors, one covered in Union Jacks. There's one to my left as well. Lots of JCBs here, lots of heavy equipment. But no, it's all been in good spirits, I'd say. A lot of cheers. People asked to cheer against the government, cheer against this budget, and as you expect, the crowd went absolutely wild at that. Similarly, when Clarkson came onto the stage, but spirited, but good-hearted, I'd say. No taking themselves to the road,
Absolutely
like you might see from
amazing.
some other protesters.
You can put across your point strongly, stridently, and legally. I mean, who would have thought it? Covering however many protests that we cover every blooming week on Whitehall, every blooming week with the environmentalists and the Palestine protesters and all the rest of it.
I think the weather's getting the better of us, guys, so I can't quite hear what we're saying, so we're going to leave it there. But yeah, you can protest legally. You can protest without chaining yourself to the road. That's the message today.
Adam, thank you so much. We'll be back with you a little bit later in the programme. But I do think that is an important point, that these people are incredibly passionate and they haven't felt the need to smash any windows.
No, or have any counter-protests or make any racist remarks. Right. I mean, it's very peaceful. Of course, farmers deeply invested in the life of this country, wanting to save farming for posterity, not just for their own interests.
And look at the banners as well. I mean, these are patriotic people. There are flags there. I mean, I don't see any racist language, as we see very often in these sort of in protests that are regarding foreign affairs. This is just a different type of protest, and I think it is important to make this point.
Absolutely. This is exactly what democracy is for, in a way, being able to make your voice heard without breaking the law, which does show that we do have good laws in this country. I know there's been a lot of concern over the state of free speech, and certainly there are issues there with these non-crime hate incidents. But at the end of the day, today is living proof that in this country we do have free speech, we do have the right to protest, that it's perfectly possible to make your voice heard in a non-disruptive but very powerful way. I mean, this cannot be ignored. And of course, yes, they are there protesting to politicians, but it's the wider country, it's the wider electorate, it's the communities and the towns and villages surrounding the farms that are going to be buying into this on a political level.
Absolutely. And looking at the families out there, this is, of course, a reminder that this is a generational issue for farmers. These farms have been in the same families, handed down from father to son, mother to daughter, generation to generation. Could we really be facing now being the first generation to break that chain, to lose that inheritance, to lose that legacy, that sort of part of ourselves as a country?
Because the government seems to assume that because these farmers have land that on paper is worth a lot of money, often into the millions of pounds, that they will have the cash to cough up for inheritance tax. And of course, they will only get their predicted £500 million over 5 years if the inheritance tax is actually paid. If the farms are sold, then of course they won't get, I mean, they may get capital gains tax or a different income, but they certainly won't get what's being predicted. But what I don't think that Whitehall seems to understand is that the income of a lot of these farms is so low, the income per year, that even if the farm is sold for £3-4 million or valued at £3 or £4 million, the inheritance tax bill that will then create of several hundreds of thousands of pounds, the farmers don't have that sat in a bank. And if they're only taking, an average salary a year from their own farm, they certainly can't pay it back, even if it is over 10 years.
No, I mean, it is such an important point, and we can't help but make it again and again and again. The margins that these farms run on are so slim. Some of these farms are so frankly small that losing 20% of them will make these farms uneconomical. But we should, of course, hear from the other side of the fence too. Earlier on, the Environment Secretary, that's Steve Reed, was asked whether the government has betrayed farmers as the National Farmers Union claims. We should be hearing from the Environment Secretary. Now, let's listen to what Steve Reed had to say.
Well, we inherited a £22 billion black hole from the previous government, and the previous Chancellor of the Exchequer covered the scale of that problem up. So none of us knew how difficult the problem would be when we were coming into government. But this government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production, but we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances, otherwise we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share, but I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Steve Reed there, the Environment Secretary, with some of the rationale behind this change. And of course, the whole premise is that some wealthy people are evading inheritance tax by buying land in order to capitalise on this agricultural property relief, which was in place until, well, will be in place until 2026.
And yet talk about a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
Indeed.
Well, Jeremy Clarkson addressed the protest as well a short while ago. Let's listen to his speech in full.
You're right, I'm not supposed to be here, I'm not supposed to be talking, but we've got a few things to say, and I'm going to start with a bit of honesty. I lived in London 25, 30 years, and when I was here, like a lot of people who live in cities and go on Twitter, I thought farmers drove around in Range Rovers, moaning, until February, and then you all went skiing. And then about 5 years ago, I started farming. And I've come to understand just how unbelievably difficult it is, and complicated, and dangerous, and cold. Very cold. Even when we're harvesting, it's cold. And it's just the forest of costs that staggered me. £200,000. Somebody needs to turn their mics off. £200,000.
We need a medic.
Medic.
We need a medic to the right.
We have a medic over to
by the building.
Building doesn't narrow it down, Ollie. I'm going to say
to the right of the stage.
To the north of the stage at 3 o'clock. Okay, so, as we all know, everyone down there, you know a tractor. £200,000 for a medium-sized one. A combine, £500,000. All the equipment costs a fortune. And if you try to price what you're selling to accommodate that, there's just a lot of moaning. You get people saying, well, I shouldn't pay that. I can get a chicken from abroad. Yeah, you can. But it's so full of chlorine, it tastes like a swimming pool with a beak. And then you've got the environmentalists endlessly shouting at you, oh, your cows, they're altering the composition of the gases in the upper atmosphere, and your fertilisers ruining the trouty freshness of our streams and rivers. And I know sometimes you just think, what's the point? We're just trying to make breakfast, lunch and dinner, and it's just this endless whinging and there's no money in it. And the regulations. Some of you down there will know what I'm on about when I say we got a lot of GS4 this year on the farm. And we were told, oh, the sheep will love that. No, they don't. They're standing looking at it in the same way that a 5-year-old looks at an olive. They don't want to eat it. And so we have all of this complication and all of this cost. And there's very, very little money in it. Very little money, as you know. And then we got the budget. Now, I know a lot of people all across the country in all walks of life took a bit of a kick on the shin with that budget. You lot got a knee in the nuts and a light hammer blow to the back of the head. Because we had pickup trucks, double cab pickup trucks, being reclassified as company cars. 211% tax rise there. £50 carbon tax on a bag of fertiliser. The basic farm payments altered in such a way that we're getting a lot less than we thought we were going to get. And then there was the inheritance tax business. Honestly, I don't know where to start. I know you've heard a lot about it today, and I'm not going to dwell on that. I will just say this. Rachel Reeves has told us, what is it, 72% of farmers are going to be unaffected by this. I've just been interviewed by Victoria Derbyshire for Newsnight. Let's see if we can educate her here, if she's still around, Victoria.
Well, there was Jeremy Clarkson speaking within the last hour in front of a group of thousands of farmers at their protest. Stay with us here on GB News, because next we're going to be getting the Prime Minister's response. Yes, we've sat down with Sir Keir Starmer in Rio de Janeiro. That next.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Ed Barker, a talented saxophonist and clarinetist from London, has had a remarkable journey in the music industry marked by significant achievements and an unusual crossover into the political sphere. Having honed his musical skills from a young age, he played in both the National Youth Orchestra and the National Youth Jazz Orchestra. In 2012, he became the solo saxophonist for pop legend George Michael. His reputation in music opened doors in politics, where he's worked with various leading Conservative members of Parliament and played a role in a number of major campaigns. To tell us more about the harmonious relationship between music and politics, I'm delighted to be joined by Ed Barker. This is quite puzzling, actually. How did a reputation in music get you into politics?
It's a good question. It's probably a question I'm still wrestling with at the age of 40. How's it happened? But somehow I've managed to do both, and I still enjoy doing them both at a high level. I think it's a simple thing of, when you're in politics, you're known as the saxophone guy, and when you're in the saxophone music industry world, you're known as the weird conservative political guy. And so it's just something people can remember you by, regardless of how good you are at either of those two things. I think it's just a device that people can kind of just latch onto to remember you.
But it's the word weird, because I imagine that most people in the music industry are probably somewhat to the left. Yeah. Certainly all the ones that I've met are. I mean, I can't imagine you and George Michael discussing Tory politics with approval, or maybe I'm wrong about that.
No, I don't tend to talk politics with people kind of when I'm not in politics somehow. And whenever there are political disagreements, people kind of, I think GB News actually gets closest to kind of embodying this spirit. People are very kind of up for learning from each other's kind of experiences and views and not biting each other's heads off.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player app. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 26 minutes past 1 and you're watching GB News. Well...
Yes, the Prime Minister has sat down with our political editor, Christopher Hope, live in Rio de Janeiro. Let's listen in.
Minister, your response to the claims by Russia that 6 American-made missiles will be fired into Russia today, and what will the UK do? Will we allow our UK-made missiles to also be fired by Ukraine to Russia?
So far as the UK is concerned, I've been very clear over a long period that we must support Ukraine. Putin cannot be allowed to win this war. It's now in day 1,000, that's 1,000 days of aggression. And therefore, I've been doubling down here at the G20 in saying we must give Ukraine the support that Ukraine needs for as long as it needs, put Ukraine in the best possible position. So that is my consistent approach. I will not comment on operational matters, and I'll tell you for why, because Putin would be the winner if I did so, and it would undermine Ukraine, and I'm not prepared to do that.
Do you worry we're risking going towards World War III?
The quickest and easiest way to resolve this conflict is for Russia to stop. That could be done today, day 1,000 of aggression. And so in terms of what needs to happen, that's clearly the quickest and easiest way to end this deadly conflict. But, you know, as long as it goes on, we will be supporting Ukraine. It matters hugely for Ukraine's sovereignty, but it matters for us as well. It impacts every single person in the United Kingdom, which is why I've taken such a strong stand.
We're in Rio de Janeiro at the G20. But back home, farmers are very, very cross about your plans on inheritance tax. Do you understand why they're so cross?
Well, look, I do understand concerns, and I want to support our farmers. It's extremely important that we do so. That's why in the budget we invested £5 billion over the next 2 years in farming on food sustainability. That's hugely important for farmers. An additional amount of money for flooding, which impacts them, and on disease outbreak. On this question of inheritance tax, which is at the heart of this concern, what I point out is that for a typical case where parents want to pass on a farm to one of their children, which would be a very typical family farm situation, then by the time the inheritance tax thresholds are all in place, in a typical case, it'd be £3 million. And that means for the vast majority of farms will be unaffected at all by this.
Are they making a fuss about nothing then?
But it's very important for me to keep making the case that it's only farms and assets over £3 million in a typical case of parents wanting to pass on to their children. And therefore, for that reason, I'm confident that the vast majority of farms will not be affected. But look, I understand concerns. We must have discussions. The Minister was in discussions yesterday with the farmers, and we'll continue to do so.
So will you
tweak
the threshold, or will you allow over 80s not to be hit by it because they can't plan for their inheritance?
Well, because the threshold is high, the vast majority are unaffected. The other thing I would say is this. I mean, I grew up in a rural area. I know firsthand that rural areas, farming communities, they do need the investment that we put in the budget into their hospitals, into their schools, into housing near where they are so their families can live. And therefore, the budget itself was absolutely focused on those things. But the threshold at £3 million is very high. The vast majority will be unaffected. And we need to keep making that case because where there's concern, I think the right thing to do is to meet that concern and talk it through.
Is your party too urban? That's what Baroness Melia says. She's the Countryside Alliance president. That you don't really get the countryside. When were you last on a farm, for example?
My first job was on a farm, Jay. I grew up in the countryside. All of my entire family live in the countryside. We're a rural family. I'm the only one that lives in a city. I do get it, and that's why I'm able to say with confidence that threshold for a typical case at £3 million is a very high threshold. And therefore the vast majority of farms will be unaffected. But I also do know that it matters to rural communities that we are investing in their NHS. They rely on it just as much as anybody in a town or city. It matters that their schools are fit for their children, and it matters hugely that there's enough housing for them and their families that's affordable in rural areas. They're central concern.
On GBNews, we have a Clive Bailey, his son Henry. Henry's 12. He's disappointed and sad that you'll be taking away farming from his generation. He says he can't maybe not be a farmer in the future. Why are you taking away Henry's dreams?
Well, I don't know the details of Henry's case. I don't know what the farm in that particular case is worth, but clearly if it's under, assuming it's a mum and dad passing on to Henry, then that would be the £3 million threshold. So that would mean it's unaffected. But I don't know the details of the particular case.
Just moving on to freedom of speech. You said in 2013 when you were DPP, there's a lot of stuff out there on social media. It's highly offensive. It's put down on a spontaneous basis pretty quickly. And your view then as DPP was those remarks don't need to be prosecuted. So why are the police going after people who tweet? It seems a bit mad given the scale of crimes and the pressure on policing.
Well, I think it's for the police really to deal with their operational matters. Sometimes it is important. We had very serious issues of people inciting violence when we had that terrible disorder over the summer. But look, by and large, I think that without telling the police what to do, they should concentrate on what matters most to the communities that they're policing.
And that's keeping the streets safe. I mean, jail terms for people who tweet are often more than those who have committed violence against people. How is that right?
Well, I won't get into the sentencing, but we're very clear that one of our missions in government is to keep our streets safe. What I mean by that is dealing with antisocial behaviour. I mean, putting those extra police officers on the streets in the town centres so people can see them. And I'm led by what I'm absolutely sure our communities most want.
Yeah. It's boiling hot in Rio. It's freezing cold in the UK. The first real test, I think, of your winter fuel allowance policy. What do you say to pensioners who can't keep warm? I mean, and not your fault in the hot climate, but they are cold and they're colder because of your policies.
Well, any pensioner that's entitled to pension credit should obviously get that credit. That is then on top of getting the payment itself for winter fuel allowance. So we've taken that targeted approach. Obviously, what we've done in the budget is to stabilise the economy. That means that we are absolutely committed to the triple lock. That means that pensions will go up by about £450, £460.
But you feel for them. What do you say to them directly?
But, I think that the most important thing for pensioners, for me to emphasise that by taking the tough choices we did, we've stabilised the economy. That means that the triple lock will ensure that they're better off. And I would also point out that under the last government, when they lost control of the economy, inflation went through the roof. I spoke to many pensioners about the problems going shopping. We cannot allow that to be inflicted on pensioners ever again, and I'm not prepared to do so.
So, Keir Starmer, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was our very own Christopher Hope interviewing the Prime Minister in a wide-ranging interview, and we'll hear more from Chopper later on. We're going to a break now, but please stay with us.
Hello again. From the Met Office, here's your latest GB News weather update on this cold but fairly sunny day for many of us. There was some heavy rain, sleet, snow that caused some disruption overnight. Most of that is now clearing away towards the east because the low pressure centre that brought that unsettled weather is pushing away. But there is a front lying across us, and that is bringing some rain, perhaps a little bit of sleet or snow across central southern parts as we go through this afternoon. Further north, a good deal of sunshine around, but watch out for some further wintry showers, some sleet and snow showers piling into northern parts of Scotland. We have Arctic air plunging its way down across the country, and so it is going to feel cold, especially with some strong winds making it feel below freezing for some places. You'll definitely want to wrap up. As we head towards this evening, and the wintry showers across northern parts of Scotland, they will continue. We could see accumulations of snow building up and some icy patches causing some disruption here. Clearer skies, a bit drier further south, but also some wintry showers pushing into northern parts of Northern Ireland and down the eastern side of England as well. Could also be some icy patches here. Across southern parts of England, it's going to be a cloudier end to the day here. Some further outbreaks of rain for a time, but the clearer skies will spread their way southwards. The cloud will clear away. So for many of us overnight, it is going to be largely dry with some lengthy clear spells. And as a result, under those clear skies, away from coastal areas, it really is going to be another chilly night. Could be colder than last night, -10, -11, possibly even as low as -12 Celsius. So a harsh frost to add to the icy patches that some places will see where we've had any wintry showers overnight. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, it's a bright sunny day for many of us. Still the chance of these wintry showers in areas exposed to those northerly winds, so watch out for those. But again, despite the sunshine, it is going to feel cold. Winds perhaps a little bit lighter than today, but still chilly.
The latest GB News travel. Good afternoon, hello, I'm Jules Buckley. The Snake Pass in Derbyshire, the A57, is closed both ways because of snow, as is the Woodhead Pass as well. A couple of collisions for the A49. Firstly, around Wufferton is closed, there's an overturned lorry, and in Dinmore, the A49 blocked a two-car collision by the Boddenham turn-off, causing delays. M4 eastbound Prince of Wales Bridge, so Wales towards England, closed and queuing back to the Caldra at junction 24. There's emergency pothole repairs continuing. Of course, we're heading towards Westminster. Whitehall closed because of the ongoing farmers' protests. Very slow around Parliament Square. Anti-clock M25 queuing just after Waltham Abbey 26 back towards junction 27 the M11. There's roadworks there, and of course there was a collision earlier too.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 37 minutes past 1. Now, of course, those protests continue to go on in Westminster. We're going to be live back on the ground talking to farmers very, very soon. But, of course, the Prime Minister is 6,000 miles away. He's in Brazil for the second day of the G20 World Leaders Summit.
Yes, Sir Keir Starmer says Ukraine is top of the agenda, but shouldn't he be looking a bit closer to home?
Well, Christopher Hope, of course, caught up with him in Rio de Janeiro and delighted to be able to speak to him now. Chris, good to see you. Let's kick off, firstly, with those questions you asked the Prime Minister over the farmer protests. This was one of the first and clearest times you've heard the Prime Minister talk about himself as a rural man. The Islington Member of Parliament trying to associate himself more with farmers.
Yeah, hi Tom and hi Miriam, welcome here to Rio de Janeiro. Boiling hot weather, I know it's snowy in London, but that's right, I asked him there if he gets the concern from farmers protesting outside Parliament today, and he gave a quite interesting argument there by himself, almost farmer Starmer. He almost donned the flat cap for GB News viewers. He said there, didn't he? His first job was on a farm, he grew up in the countryside, all of his family live in the countryside. He gets their concerns, but of course the PM's position is this, that we have to cut back on raise more taxes, cut back on spending in some areas in order to ensure we have public services all farmers rely on as well. So I've never heard him talk in those terms. We know his father was a tool maker, but not many knew that Starmer's job, the PM's job,
there. We're going to see if we can persist with you, Chris, despite the slightly wobbly line 6,000 miles away. Chris, are you still with us there?
No, I don't think we can.
OK, we'll see if we can.
It must be all that heat, that sunshine. But it was a very interesting interview because, as Chris was saying, we haven't heard Keir Starmer before relate that incident of working on a farm. But it does seem at the heart of this that there is a misunderstanding. The Treasury seems to think that 73% of farms won't be affected, but farmers and farmers' representatives disagree because they say that the changes to the business property relief, as well as the agricultural property relief, is what is going to do the damage.
Yeah, well, let's get on to some of those details now. Delighted to be joined by the economist Jonathan Porters. Jonathan, thanks so much for joining us, Professor of Economics at King's College London, of course. Firstly, there is a huge disagreement on the numbers here. The Treasury is saying it's only going to affect, 27% of farms, but farmers clearly disagree.
That's right. Now, it's very difficult because, of course, this is complicated. Inheritance tax and tax in general is very complicated. But the basic point here that the Treasury are making is that you can't just look at the values of land to get the answer here, or the value of farms. You actually have to look at the data for the claims that are made, which takes account of people's actual positions, their inheritance tax liability with and without the relief in previous years. And here it's pretty clear that the Treasury are right and the farmers or the Country Landowners Association or the NFU or whatever are wrong. They are looking at the wrong data. They're looking at data from DEFRA, which does not claim in any way to be about inheritance tax. So, of course, things will change. This won't come in for a year or two, and people will have made arrangements to avoid as much as possible this new liability for tax, which will presumably reduce the numbers even further. But I think the Treasury's basic point that the farmers' organisations are looking at the wrong data, they don't really understand how this will work, and that the number of farms who will actually be affected by this is considerably lower than they're claiming. The Treasury would appear to be right about that.
But Jonathan, of course, the farmers' organisations say the exact opposite. They say the Treasury are looking at the wrong figures. They're only looking at the number of farmers who've claimed agricultural property relief over recent years and not included data on the business property relief, which of course affects, therefore would affect far more farmers. And the reforms are to both reliefs, which collapse the overall relief possible to £3 million if it's a spouse passing on to children. So do you not think there's some likelihood here that it's the Treasury that haven't quite understood how farming works?
Well, no, because you're not saying that the Treasury doesn't understand how farming works. And of course, the Treasury doesn't understand how very much works. You're quite right about that. But what you've just said is actually the Treasury doesn't understand how tax works and how the intersection of agricultural relief and business relief works. And if that were true, that would be completely incompetent on the part of the Treasury, because it wouldn't be them not understanding how farms work, it would be them not understanding how their own tax system works. But in fact, if you look at the statement that the Treasury has released, it says that HMRC figures are based on inheritance tax data and illustrate the distribution of claims values where relief has been available on agricultural and business property. So the Treasury are at least saying, yes, we're not complete idiots. We have looked at the interaction between the two. We do know what we're doing, and these numbers are the best that are available at the moment. Now, of course, I'm not in the Treasury anymore. I'm no longer a civil servant. So, you know, it's possible, of course, the Treasury have got it wrong. But if so, that would be really quite incompetent. And they certainly, what they've said indicates that they are looking at both of those and they are getting their numbers right. And they should be in a position to do that. It's not about them not understanding how farms work. It's about them actually understanding how the tax system works.
Look, Jonathan, whether it's a third of farms or 2/3 of farms or somewhere in between or neither, quite frankly, we know that farms are going to be hit by this tax. We know that some farms will have to sell up and cease operation. Well, these are businesses that run with razor-thin margins that don't have the sort of liquid capital to pay this vast amount of tax that many of them will be having to pay as a result of these changes. Is the government simply relaxed? And perhaps, you know, it's the 21st century, perhaps we should have fewer farmers. I mean, perhaps that is just the view of the Treasury. I mean, maybe it is more economically efficient for us as a country to have fewer, larger corporate farms and less family farming.
Well, I think that there probably is something to that. I don't think that's the Treasury's policy, but I do think that, you know, inheritance tax is a tax which applies to all of us. It applies to you and me if we or our parents have enough money. We are talking here about multi-million-pound estates. And I think if what you're saying is that when people inherit a multi-million-pound estate, they have to sell some of that to pay, you know, still not as much as inheritance tax as you or I would pay on a similar amount of assets, right? Because there's still a very significant relief here. They're still paying much less than people inheriting, you know, a £2 million or £3 million home.
But Jonathan, it is not like another asset. You know, if your parent dies and leaves a house that is then empty, of course you can sell it to pay the inheritance tax. The fact is, unless these farms remain complete and in the size that they are now, they are no longer worth farming. It is not. You cannot fairly compare it to any other type of inherited asset.
Well, you're comparing it to other types of business, right? I mean, if you inherited just to take an example, your father's toolmaker's business, as Keir Starmer might, you know, you'd be in the same position as a farmer. Should Keir Starmer have been able to continue with the family trade of toolmaker and not have to pay inheritance tax on his his father's, let's assume in this case, multi-million-pound tool business? Well, maybe we do want people to be able to avoid the taxes the rest of us pay and to continue in the same profession that they are grandfathers or great grandparents.
And you can see, looking at a
Maybe
spreadsheet,
not.
that of course makes sense. I mean, either we treat every business the same or we don't. But I think that there has been, of course, this societal understanding that we treat farms a little bit differently. That these aren't the most economically efficient businesses that could possibly. I mean, lots of people could obviously sell up their farms and invest it in Californian tech and make a lot more money, but they choose not to because there's something inherently sort of natural about what they do. I mean, Jonathan Porteous, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there and head back to Brazil, but really appreciate talking to you and thanks for joining us.
Well, we'll be back after the break. Do stay tuned.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Young adults spend a few years living away from home at university, those who go to university, but many then have no choice but to move back in with their parents because of the rising cost of renting.
But is this an excuse, and are Gen Z or Z just being lazy?
I mean, what do you make of it, Debbie? Because we do have to have some sympathy, don't we, in that, you know, rents are very high, it's very hard to get a mortgage. There are issues there.
I think the push towards young people to go to university as well is not necessarily the right thing for a lot of people. And I think people should start work early. These guys leave their universities with a huge amount of debt, no jobs, or huge rent. You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. So I think we've got to look at the work ethic and start it younger. Because I think it's so easy just to move back with your mum and dad, isn't it?
To speak like a Gen Zer, they would say that, well, it's OK for your generation, you had it easy.
Realistically, that isn't quite that true, because a lot of people then didn't go to university. This is a relatively new thing that everybody goes to university.
I have to say, what strikes me today is that you still have, amongst all these problems, not having enough money, going to university when perhaps you shouldn't be, all these sort of issues, you still get all these people saying, well, I'm going to have a year out.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. And I think the thing is, they say, oh, it was easy for you, but it wasn't really. We still had to rent places.
But the thing is with this debate, Debbie, is the generation we're talking about, Gen Z, who we're accusing of being lazy, have been raised by our generation.
Yeah.
So what have we done wrong that, if they are lazier, has made them like that?
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 to 2 and you're watching GB News with Miriam, Kate and Tom Harwood. Now, we've been doing lots on the farmers' protest. They're still ongoing. We've also just viewed a fantastic interview between Christopher Hope and the Prime Minister, very wide-ranging, and we can tell you that Christopher Hope can join us now from Rio de Janeiro, where he is covering the G20 summit.
And of course, just as we introduce Christopher Hope, we've had some connection problems all the way to Brazil all day, but unfortunately, Chris can't join us now.
It's too hot in Brazil, too cold here.
I'm sure what we need is an Elon Musk satellite to connect us. But of course, the farmers' protests have been a huge, huge story today. And Christopher Hope was asking Keir Starmer what he made of it. And Starmer had a bit of a revelation for everyone. He almost donned that barber jacket, put on his hunter wellies and declared himself to be spiritually a farmer.
Well, he did say that he'd had a job on a farm as a young adult, I think.
His first job, I think he said.
And so understood the difficulties that farmers face. But I think it's very difficult for anybody to understand the difficulties farmers face without having experienced that the conditions over the last few years, particularly. I know when I was an MP, I had lots of farmers in my constituency and visiting them and seeing how unbelievably hard they worked, not only just to feed their animals or harvest their crops, but also to look after the land. And I think that's the thing that we need to remember, is that if our farmers weren't there, it wouldn't just be a problem for food security. Also, who would look after the land? Who would, give it that love 24/7, 365 days a year?
Well, we now can join Christopher Hope live from Rio de Janeiro. So let's hope this line holds, Chris. What was your biggest takeaway from your interview?
Hi Tom, hi Miriam. Yeah, welcome back to Brazil. I was struck by how the Prime Minister almost adopted the clothes of the farmer by putting on a flat cap, saying that, of course, that his first job was on a farm. All his family live in the rural setting. He grew up in the countryside, trying to put himself on the side of the farmer. But he's £1 million cap above that 20% of inheritance tax. Of course, he would say that that's £3 million, including spousal allowances and other things. But yeah, no warm comfort for freezing cold farmers in Westminster today. But he's trying to show farmers he's on their side too.
Chris, was that he mentioned this £5 billion additional for farmers over the next 5 years. But actually, if you dig into the detail of that, that's just a continuation of the kind of subsidies that have been ongoing for farmers for some time. And it's not that farmers aren't grateful for that, but they were already expecting those subsidies. This isn't new money, is it?
Yeah, that money was announced in the budget, Miriam, and they are really clinging on to that figure to try and work out if they can use that to get past this difficulty. But already on Twitter, people are saying, why have this fight with the farmers when it's only a fraction, maybe a day or a couple of days of support for the NHS?
Really, really stark stuff there. But Chris, it wasn't just farms that you asked about. Clearly, the Prime Minister has other trials and tribulations too. Oh, I think we might have lost the communication there. Chris, we're going to catch up with you again in the next hour. But this is Good Afternoon Britain here on GB News. We've been catching up with more farmers in Westminster. The tractors have taken to the streets. But what do you think about it all? gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved in all of the discussions that we've been having today. We'll get some time to read some of those comments out in the next hour.
Of course, lots of support for the farmers, certainly, both on Twitter, on our feed. They seem to have really captured people's hearts. People are very, very supportive. And all the polling shows that most people, regardless of whether or not they've got links to farming, are against these changes to inheritance tax. So do you think the government is going to U-turn? Do you think they will stick to their guns? Do you think Labour MPs will start to break ranks? We'll see. Don't go away. We're going to be covering it all. Stick with us.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. From the Met Office, here's your latest GB News weather update on this cold but fairly sunny day for many of us. There was some heavy rain, sleet, snow that caused some disruption overnight. Most of that is now clearing away towards the east because the low pressure centre that brought that unsettled weather is pushing away. But there is a front lying across us, and that is bringing some rain, perhaps a little bit of sleet or snow across central southern parts as we go through this afternoon. Further north, a good deal of sunshine around, but watch out for some further wintry showers, some sleet and snow showers piling into northern parts of Scotland. We have Arctic air plunging its way down across the country, and so it is going to feel cold, especially with some strong winds making it feel below freezing for some places. You'll definitely want to wrap up. As we head towards this evening, and the wintry showers across northern parts of Scotland, they will continue. We could see accumulations of snow building up and some icy patches causing some disruption here. Clearer skies, a bit drier further south, but also some wintry showers pushing into northern parts of Northern Ireland and down the eastern side of England as well. Could also be some icy patches here. Across southern parts of England, it's going to be a cloudier end to the day here. Some further outbreaks of rain for a time, but the clearer skies will spread their way south southwards, the cloud will clear away. So for many of us overnight, it is going to be largely dry with some lengthy clear spells. And as a result, under those clear skies, away from coastal areas, it really is going to be another chilly night. Could be colder than last night, -10, -11, possibly even as low as -12 Celsius. So a harsh frost to add to the icy patches that some places will see where we've had any wintry showers overnight. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, it's a bright sunny day for many of us. Still the chance of these wintry showers in areas exposed to those northerly winds, so watch out for those. But again, despite the sunshine, it is going to feel cold. Winds perhaps a little bit lighter than today, but still chilly.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark Meets and My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it. Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Tuesday, the 19th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Miriam Cates.
Farmers' fury. Thousands of farmers from across Britain are in London today rallying against the planned changes to inheritance tax for farms. Yes, it's being dubbed the family farm tax. Jeremy Clarkson didn't mince his words.
I beg of the government to be big, to accept that this was rushed through, it wasn't thought out, and it's a mistake. That's the big thing to do, admit it, and back down.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is in Brazil. It's day 2 of the World Leaders G20 Summit, where Starmer told our political editor, Christopher Hope, that the Prime Minister's first job was on a farm.
And back at home, many parts of the UK have woken up to snow this morning, as the Met Office says the country is getting its first taste of winter.
It's really interesting news that Keir Starmer had his first job on a farm. I don't think he's ever told anyone that before. Of course, potentially gives you an insight into rural life. But of course, just having worked on a farm does not really potentially qualify you to fully understand the changes that are being imposed here. And of course, it's not just about the numbers, is it? It's about the philosophical, it's about the morality. Is it moral to force farmers to sell a farm in order to pay some money to the Treasury, which will fund the NHS for, what, a few hours?
And of course, we were listening to Jeremy Clarkson say how he used to be sort of a city-dwelling London man who didn't understand enough about the countryside, but he's, gone and lived in the countryside, set up his own farm, learnt so much about that lifestyle that he's changed his view on a lot of things about farmers. Question is, has the Prime Minister done the opposite journey? 25 years ago, working on a farm briefly as a young man, but then, of course, going off to his elite universities, getting his law degree, becoming a senior lawyer, becoming Director of Public Prosecutions, living in central London for decade upon decade upon decade. Has he lost touch with his rural?
Well, of course, you need people to live in cities. You need people to be lawyers. All these jobs that are worthwhile. The question is, are we fully understanding what farmers do? Are we in touch with the fact that they produce our food? Do we fully understand the consequences of something like this? And the problem with just looking at the value of the farm in terms of on paper is it doesn't give any consequence to how much food that farm's producing. So the Treasury is saying this will only affect the biggest farms. Well, maybe, but they are the farms that produce the most food. They're not necessarily the most profitable, they may be, but why do we want those farms to be broken up?
And does it matter that the Prime Minister represents a inner London constituency of Islington, that the Environment Secretary represents a London constituency of Croydon, that the Farming Minister represents a city constituency of Cambridge, that the Chancellor represents a city constituency of Leeds? I mean, does it matter that you don't have any rural MPs around any of these decisions at all?
I don't think it does matter if the civil service do their job of being the experts and properly briefing ministers, and of course that those ministers are in touch with other MPs and constituents. I don't think it should rule people out if they don't have first-hand knowledge, but it just shows how important it is that the civil service do understand these things and do give correct briefings.
And it's funny, given how much the current government says it's very important to have representation at the top of the table, that they're striving for. Well, they wanted a 50-50 gender split in Parliament. They want, obviously, an ethnic diversity amongst their MPs. And yet, in the Cabinet, there's none of that rural city diversity. Is that an important part of the EDI mix that seems to have been avoided?
I think you've invented a new protected characteristic there, Tom. Definitely we should be campaigning for this. Well, we'll have more on farmers and much more after the news.
Good afternoon. The top stories this hour. Farming leaders have accused the Chancellor of refusing to engage with them over controversial changes to inheritance tax as thousands of farmers march on Westminster. First unveiled in Rachel Reeves' budget, the plans to impose inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million have sparked fury among rural communities who've contested the government's assertion that small family farms won't be impacted by the changes. The president of the National Farmers Union says Labour has destroyed a contract between farming and the government dating back to the Second World War with its changes to inheritance tax. Environment Secretary Steve Reed says Labour had no choice.
This government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. But we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances. Otherwise, we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Well, speaking at the protest in Westminster this morning, Shadow Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Victoria Atkins says the impact on farmers will be huge.
The real-life impacts of this are enormous because we know already around kitchen tables in farms up and down the country, farmers have got advice from their accountants, from their business advisors, and they are deeply, deeply worried and distressed that if older members of the family live past March 2026 when this change comes in, then they are faced with an enormous inheritance tax bill when that dear beloved relative passes on. And when I say, huge bills, we're talking hundreds of thousands of pounds, possibly even over £1 million.
Television presenter Jeremy Clarkson said Rachel Reeves has used a blunderbuss to hit farmers.
If she'd have wanted to take out the likes of James Dyson and investment bankers and so on, she would have used a sniper's rifle. But she's used a blunderbuss and she's hit all this lot. It was, as I understand it, it was a very rushed last-minute decision. And I think, we all make mistakes in life, and I think it's time for them to say, you know what, we've cocked this one up a bit and back down. That's my view.
Russia says Ukraine fired US-supplied long-range missiles into the country for the first time today. The Ministry of Defence in Moscow says Ukraine used the Army tactical missile system in a strike in Russia this morning. Ukraine hasn't commented yet. It comes after the US President Joe Biden yesterday gave the green light to Kyiv to use those long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. Russia has today said it's changed nuclear policy as Moscow signals anger over that decision. Downing Street responded today saying Putin's decision to raise the issue of nuclear weapons again is the latest example of irresponsibility from the depraved Russian government. Sir Keir Starmer has said Ukraine is number one on his agenda at the G20 summit. It is day 2, that began yesterday. And he also vowed to double down on support for Ukraine. Elsewhere, a getaway driver who helped 4 teenagers kill 2 boys with machetes during a case of mistaken identity has been jailed for at least 38 years. 45-year-old Anthony Snook drove 18-year-old Riley Tolliver and boys aged 15, 16 and 17 to and from Knoll West and Bristol, where they murdered Mason Rist and Max Dixon. 15-year-old Mason and 16-year-old Max died from stab wounds after being chased by the 4 armed teenagers in January. Tolliver and the 3 boys, who can't be named for legal reasons, had been driven to and from Knoll West by Snook as part of a revenge mission. And almost 200 schools have closed in England and Wales, and new weather warnings issued as snow hits parts of the UK. Thousands of train passengers also suffering disruption due to that severe weather. By 11 o'clock this morning, around 64 out of a total of 120 services planned by East Midlands Railway were reportedly cancelled or delayed by at least 30 minutes. There are currently 3 yellow warnings in place for snow and ice in northern Scotland, northern England and parts of Northern Ireland, as well as the Midlands and North East Wales. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes past 2. Now, in protest at planned changes to inheritance tax rules that will hit family farms, farmers are gathering en masse in London to try and force the government to change course, accusing Sir Keir Starmer's ministry of betraying them.
Well, among the speakers addressing the rally has been Jeremy Clarkson. Despite recently undergoing a life-saving heart operation, he clearly did not mince his words.
I beg of the government to be big, to accept that this was rushed through, it wasn't thought out, and it's a mistake. That's the big thing to do, admit it, and back down.
Well, the speeches are over, but many farmers are still in Westminster, and with them is our news reporter Adam Cherry in Westminster for us now. Adam, who have you got with you?
That's right, Tom. I'm joined by Abby Steele, first of all. Abby, thanks for joining us on GB News. Now, you're a third-generation farmer. So first of all, tell us where have you come from and why it was important for you to be here today?
Yeah, so I'm from Cumbria. And we have a hill farm up there. It's a traditional family-run farm, and it's been in the family for many, many years. And it was just important for me to come here today because
Oh, it seems like the gremlins are out for us. They don't want to hear from the farmers or the Cumbrian hill farmers. We'll see if we can re-establish communications.
The farmers are used to this weather, but obviously our technical equipment isn't. However, we do have another guest who is joining us down the line to react to what's going on with the farmers today, Jim Dale. Thank you for joining us now. Jim Dale, meteorologist, of course, but opinion on the farmers. What's your view of what's going on today in Westminster?
Well, the first thing to say is anybody is entitled to protest. That's written in stone, I think, as far as the UK is concerned. There's no problem with that, but it may be how they protest. In terms of the political side of things, I don't agree at all in terms of what the farmers are actually saying. This is not going to affect all the farmers by any stretch of the imagination. This is a long time coming that they catch up with the rest of us in terms of inheritance tax that we all have to pay if we hand things on to our children or whoever down the line. So this is just, and remember, this is aimed at the wealthiest. This isn't all farmers by any stretch of the imagination. There's another thing to say as well. I watched the space on this one, and I'm not saying that this has happened. We're getting pictures of these tractors going up and down London streets, etc. We know what happened to the climate protesters if they block the streets and stop people moving, doing their normal duty, their normal day's work, etc. I'm not saying this has happened in this case, but certainly if it has, then the Metropolitan Police have got to treat them in exactly the same way under the same law as they did the climate protesters, and arrest them and take them away and put them in front of a judge in exactly the same way. So we'll see whether that has actually occurred or not, but even Stevens, as far as these things are concerned.
Yeah, Jim, I suppose the difference here is that the climate protesters go around smashing windows, throwing paint on buildings and lying in roads without a permit, whereas all these farmers have done is applied to the police, been granted a road closure, set up a stage. They seem to have acted lawfully this entire afternoon.
Yeah, well, let's be clear what the climate protesters are all about. They are about protecting this earth and the future. You've seen what's been going on around the world in the climate catastrophes that have been going on. This isn't a self-interest thing as far as they're concerned. What the farmers are all about is self-interest, greed, if you like. That's what this is about. So let's make it clear there's a huge differential between the two. And not every climate protester smashes glass or throws paint. Many of them are very peaceful. They stand there. Yes, they disrupt the roads, and the police do whatever they do, and they get arrested and they get fined.
If farmers really were self-interested, instead of being some of the hardest working people in the country, wouldn't they just sell up? I mean, their land's worth millions. If they sold that to property developers, they could walk off with huge profits if they really were as selfish as you're making out.
Well, I think we could all say that in our own jobs. We could walk away from our own jobs. You could walk away. We're all hard working.
No, Jim, there is a clear difference. I don't own millions of pounds of land that I could sell for property. These farmers do, but they choose to farm it for posterity, for feeding the nation, rather than selling it and pocketing the cash. That's very different from having an ordinary job, isn't it?
I don't think so. I think it's exactly the same. The fact they own tracts and tracts of land makes them very wealthy in terms of the land value, and land value has gone up exponentially over the period. Some of that has to go back to the state in order that we can pay for our NHS, our roads, etc. They have to contribute in exactly the same way. And I stress the point that this is aimed at the most wealthiest, not everyone. So this has been a bit of a carry-on, if you like, something that I think the media and others have escalated to a point. And I think I think it's just a case of fairness, and that's what this is all about. Fairness in terms of treating people in exactly the same way. We have to pay an inheritance tax, so should these wealthy farmers, and if they disrupt the roads in exactly the same way as climate protesters, then they should be arrested. And that's the end of that. That's how I view things.
I appreciate the conditional you're using there, but of course there's zero evidence that there has been any illegality amongst these protests. There is this crucial point, though, that these are farmers who have held these farms in their families for generations. Father to father, mother to daughter, father to son, generation to generation, for in some cases hundreds of years. What gives this government the right to break that chain for the first time, to say simply because through a phenomenon outside of these farmers' control, the land that they sit on has grown in value because land across the country has grown in value. They haven't seen any of that value in their pocket. They haven't sold off any of that land. They continue to farm it as their families have always farmed it, making the little money that farmers make. But just because the land that they sit on has soared in value, what gives the government the right to come in and say, we're changing the rules, you might have planned for decades to pass this on to your children, and now you can't?
Well, there's no difference between a farmer doing that and you selling your house or me selling my house and doing exactly the same. The inheritance tax applies. All that's happening here is it's levelling up time. It's about time as well that people were treated exactly the same way.
But Jim, that isn't strictly true.
House goes up.
That isn't strictly true, because if you pass on, let's say, a house, so you have a parent who dies, that house is unoccupied, you sell the house, if it's worth enough, you pay inheritance tax on it. That's very different to passing on a business, a going concern, and there are reliefs on businesses, not just farms, but on businesses that are trading, there are reliefs, because the understanding is that that business is worthless if it has to be broken up and sold in order to pay the inheritance tax. So in order to preserve the economic activity of a farm or another business, it is relieved from inheritance tax. That has been our understanding. So it's not correct, is it, to say that an asset such as a house passed on is the same as a working business? That's not correct.
I think that there is some degree of parity there. The fact that they've got whether it be, look, they live in these houses. It's not a case that it's a farm. They live in them exactly the same as we do, and it's mainly the house or the farm value plus the land attached to it. So all that's happening is it's a levelling up exercise, which is basically been put forward by this government that have been elected by this population, so they can make these decisions to make sure that we have an NHS that's actually on its feet rather than collapsing it as it has done for the last 14 years. But if there's a problem, if they find that they don't agree with the government, then they're quite entitled to protest peacefully and without disrupting the roads and people travelling to and from, and as long as that's happening, that's absolutely fine, and the government will make their decision. All I'm saying here is there has to be parity, equalness across the board between climate protesters, these farmer protesters, and ourselves in paying inheritance tax, which everybody else pays apart from these guys, and it's the richest of them. This is where it's aimed at, to equal things out so we can afford things that we need in this country, and that is the point.
You say this is levelling up. I think quite a few farmers would see it as levelling down. But Jim Dale, always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on GBNews.
Thank you.
Well, an interesting take, that's for sure. Of course, inheritance tax only paid by around 4% of estates nationally, so far more farmers are affected by inheritance tax rules than everybody else, so make that clear.
But this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and don't go anywhere because we will be heading back to Westminster with a stable connection to talk to more farmers. Our reporter Adam Cherry is there after this.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tell us about this film, because it's obviously come from your own experiences.
We wanted to create something for the entertainment industry that wasn't just another kind of dull documentary. I mean, some of them are brilliant, they're very informative, but you kind of leave a bit bewildered and a little bit kind of flat. So we thought, I've got a passion for writing and you've obviously got an unbounded knowledge on the subject. Why don't we create a film with a kind of satirical look on eating disorders?
So this came it's been made 20 years after your own...
It is 20 years.
20 years,
practically to the day.
So Samantha, you suffered with OCD and an eating disorder as well?
Yes.
And that's when your mum became a counsellor, is that right?
A little bit later on, I think we spent a bit of time in the system and I realised that it wasn't working for us. So I took it on myself to learn as much as I could about the subject.
I call it a tragedy, probably the wrong word, but
no, it is a tragedy because mental ill health and eating disorders destroy the lives of not only the sufferers but their families as well.
But you've turned that into something so positive and so
It's amazing, really, that 20 years ago our story was just beginning, and 20 years on, what we've done. But I have to say that very little has changed in the system.
I've heard that.
And I think that's what we're passionate about.
Yeah, so...
That was why we wanted to... I mean, I work with families every day and I see the destruction that eating disorders and other mental illnesses not just bring to the sufferer, but the whole family.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really passions me, because obviously 20 years ago we were there. And I just feel that so much more needs to be done. And I think with eating disorders, there is still a lot of misunderstanding around the subject.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 22 minutes past 2, and we're going to return to Westminster now, where the farmers' protest is still in full swing. They're, of course, protesting against the government's plans to slap a 20% inheritance tax levy on all holdings worth over £1 million, which the National Farmers Union says amounts to a betrayal of farmers.
Well, we can speak to our reporter now, Will Hollis, who's there on the ground for us, intrepidly sticking it out despite the weather. Will, take it away.
Well, the National Farmers Union says the introduction of inheritance tax and the other measures that were announced recently in the budget could be crippling for family farms. And we've got one family farm, tried and true, a 7th-generation family farm. We've got George and Claudine as well from the Russell family. Claudine, let's just start off with you first of all. What does it mean to be down here with the whole of your family that you've inherited from and plan to pass down maybe at the end of your life?
Yeah, well, we took the kids out of school for the day because we thought it was important, and just pleased there were so many people. We turned around, I've never seen so many people, so yeah, it's really good. But I think we've got to just show them that this is wrong, you know. Some things, it's not bad to admit they were wrong, change it around. I can see what they were trying to do, but the threshold is far too low, so it's affecting family farms.
That's what the government says. They say that they need funds to pay for public services that everybody uses, and they think that farmers, particularly what they describe as the wealthier farmers or wealthier landowners, are the way to pay for it. What's your argument against that?
We're not wealthy. Yeah, I think, you know, it's small family farms. We just work every day trying to get food for the British public, and I just think this is unfair. It's not aimed at the people that they think they're aiming at. They've just got the sums wrong, so they need to have a recalculate, come and speak to us, and maybe go again.
We're in the heart of Westminster. It's considered to be the centre of the UK. Our politics is decided here. But where is it that you're from, and what is the type of farm you're from?
We're from down in Kent, so historically we had a fruit farm, but we do cattle and sheep now.
Your son here, George, he's one of the people that may inherit the family farm, the Russell family farm, one day. What does it mean to you being here with all of your family, but so many other farmers, particularly young farmers, who are all supporting the same issue, which is to reverse inheritance tax?
It's just important because family farms are what have provided food for England through 2 world wars and up to now, so it's a vital part of our economy.
Why, as a young farmer, is this something that you want to carry on?
It's a way of life. It's not a job. I've been brought up around farming, and I can't really imagine my life without it.
What are you hoping to get out of today? There's been around 10,000 farmers who have been raising their voices. Some farmers have been meeting with their MPs, around 1,800 of them, but many more have come down here just to be a part of this. What is it that you think that farmers may have achieved by today, if anything?
I just want people to listen. I just want the government to hear what we're saying and at least have a look, go back to the drawing board and just see if they can do it better and help more family farms like us.
Just give you a bit of a view. This is the entire Russell family. We've got Grandad, Dad, Sister, George and Claudine as well here. What do you think might happen now? One of the things that the NFU said was they don't want to block the roads for the whole day. They don't want to set London at standstill, but they are prepared to carry on in the future. Is this your last time in London if this isn't reversed?
No, we'll come back, and I think that was what everyone said today. I think this was the start, and then hopefully they'll listen to us, and if not, I'm sure there's plans for further things later.
Perfect. Claudine, George and the whole of the Russell family here beneath Big Ben. It's kind of almost like a little bit of a day out. Not necessarily fun here in the rain. Of course, farmers are very used to the rain, but the reason they're here is because tens of thousands of farmers around the country are fearful of their future, but the government says they need to pay for public services, and this is the way they're going to do it.
Fantastic stuff. Will Hollis, thank you very much for bringing us that, and thanks too to the Russell family.
Yeah, very articulate young man there. Possible future NFU leader, I wonder. Clearly passionate about British farmer. Well, sticking with the farmers' protest, we're going to return to our reporter Adam Cherry, who is also still in Westminster for us. Adam, are the numbers dying down there, or still plenty of farmers and tractors around?
It's a little bit quiet here on Whitehall now. They have dispersed. I think the weather, as brave as farmers are, they decided they're going to go and have a drink, I think, rather than stick around in the rain. Nonetheless, we are joined by a couple of troopers. First of all, we're joined by Abby Steele. Abby, thanks for joining us again on GB News. You're a third-generation farmer. Can you just tell us a little bit about you, your farm, and why it was important that you were here today?
Yeah, so I'm here today representing my family farm up in the hills of Cumbria. So we are a hill farm. We're 1,250 feet above sea level, so we're quite used to this weather. Yeah. But it was important for me to be here today to represent our community and the fact that we're just being completely undervalued. It's already hard enough, and then we've just been hit with this. It's just devastating.
So the government say they're fully committed to farming, and this is necessary for the largest landowners to contribute a little bit more. What do you make of that?
I think they've already proven themselves to be liars. And I know Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer keep saying that it's the vast majority of farmers will not be affected by this. The vast majority of farmers will be affected by this. Do not underestimate that. And just for anybody watching at home who doesn't appreciate, this is going to have a ripple effect. This is going to have a huge effect across the whole country. Everyone is going to be affected by this if we don't act now.
Abby, thank you very much for joining us on GB News. Go and get yourself warm.
Thanks.
A couple more chaps who are still standing with in the rain. We're giving them an umbrella so they're not quite as damp as they might be. Chaps, Henry, Leon, thank you for joining us. What does this mean for you? Why are you here today as young farmers? You're 18 and 19.
We're here to represent not only our families but also our friends who are also in farming and have been shafted completely by the government, and we need to support them as much as possible.
What did you think of the speeches today? Let's talk about the politicians. So we heard from Kenny Badenoch and Ed Davey. What did you think of their speeches? Of course, they're opposing this, but was it strong enough? Was it what you wanted to hear?
Yes, I think we need to definitely do a lot more to support the farming community as a whole, and I think they definitely did a good job coming out here today to support us.
Finally, just on the government, how will this affect you going forward? As I said, you're both young guys. You're hoping to make a career of this, I assume. What does it mean for you?
Well, we hope that we don't end up in a tragic situation where one of our family members dies before we're able to hand over the farm, because that's really and also our well, we really hope that things change. It can't go on like this because it will destroy farming.
Of course.
Yeah.
What do you think of Jeremy Clarkson's speech? The rock star speech.
I'm afraid we were late, so he missed it.
Oh, you missed it? Okay.
But I'm sure we'll watch it on television later.
Excellent. Well, Charles, it was great. I really appreciate you standing in the rain with us all this time. Henry, Leon, thank you very much for joining us on GB News. There you have it, guys. Yeah, as I say, the rain is putting people off a little bit, but plenty of people here still rallying for the cause, and a very moving day.
Well, Adam, Cherry, thank you very much for joining us there live from Whitehall. And of course, if like you, if like those two last farmers there, you missed the Jeremy Clarkson speech, we will be playing it out a little bit later on GB News, so do stay watching.
Yes, indeed. Well, earlier on, the Environment Secretary was asked whether the government has betrayed farmers, as the NFU claims. Here's what Steve Reed had to say.
Well, we inherited a £22 billion black hole from the previous government, and the previous Chancellor of the Exchequer covered the scale of that problem up. So none of us knew how difficult the problem would be when we were coming into government. But this government's commitment to farming and to farmers is absolute. That's why we've allocated £5 billion to farming in the budget. That's the biggest amount of money in our country's history for sustainable food production. But we have to plug that £22 billion black hole in our public finances, otherwise we can't fix our public services like the broken National Health Service. So it's only right that we've had to ask the wealthiest landowners and the biggest farms to pay their fair share. But I would emphasise only around 500 farms will be affected. The vast majority of farmers will pay no more under the new scheme than they do under the current one.
Well, Steve Reed there, the Environment Secretary. And of course, underpinning all this is the question, should farmers be treated any differently from anybody else in any particular industry? Please do let us know what you think.
Well, lots more to come on today's programme. Of course, we're going to be catching up with everything going on in the busy world of politics, but that's after your news headlines.
Tom, thank you. The top stories. Farming leaders have accused the Chancellor of refusing to engage with them over controversial changes to inheritance tax, as thousands of farmers have been protesting at Westminster today. Well, first unveiled in Rachel Reeves' budget, the plans to impose inheritance tax on farms worth more than £1 million have sparked fury among rural communities who've contested the government's assertion that small family farms won't be impacted. The president of the National Farmers Union says Labour has destroyed a contract between farming and the government dating back to the Second World War with its changes to inheritance tax. Russia says Ukraine fired US-supplied long-range missiles into the country for the first time today. The Ministry of Defence in Moscow says Ukraine used the Army tactical missile system in a strike in Russia this morning. Ukraine hasn't commented yet. It comes after the US President Joe Biden yesterday gave the green light to Kyiv to use such missiles to strike inside Russia. Well, Russia says it's changed nuclear policy as Moscow signals anger over the decision. Downing Street responded today saying Putin's decision to raise the issue of nuclear weapons again is the latest example of irresponsibility from what he called the depraved Russian government. And almost 200 schools have closed in England and Wales, and new weather warnings issued as snow has hit parts of the country. Thousands of train passengers also suffering disruption due to severe weather. The Met Office has issued 4 new yellow weather warnings for ice and snow covering England, Scotland and Wales. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More news in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello again. From the Met Office, here's your latest GB News weather update on this cold but fairly sunny day for many of us. There was some heavy rain, sleet, snow that caused some disruption overnight. Most of that is now clearing away towards the east because the low pressure centre that brought that unsettled weather is pushing away. But there is a front lying across us, and that is bringing some rain, perhaps a little bit of sleet or snow across central southern parts as we go through this afternoon. Further north, a good deal of sunshine around, but watch out for some further wintry showers, some sleet and snow showers piling into northern parts of Scotland. We have have Arctic air plunging its way down across the country, and so it is going to feel cold, especially with some strong winds, making it feel below freezing for some places. You'll definitely want to wrap up. As we head towards this evening and the wintry showers across northern parts of Scotland, they will continue. We could see accumulations of snow building up and some icy patches causing some disruption here. Clearer skies, a bit drier further south, but also some wintry showers pushing into northern parts of Northern Ireland and down the eastern side of England as well. Could also be some icy patches here. Across southern parts of England, it's going to be a cloudier end to the day here. Some further outbreaks of rain for a time, but the clearer skies will spread their way southwards. The cloud will clear away. So for many of us overnight, it is going to be largely dry with some lengthy clear spells. And as a result, under those clear skies, away from coastal areas, it really is going to be another chilly night. Could be colder than last night, -10, -11, possibly even as low as -12 Celsius. So a harsh frost to add to the icy patches that some places will see where we've had any wintry showers overnight. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, it's a bright sunny day for many of us. Still the chance of these wintry showers in areas exposed to those northerly winds, so watch out for those. But again, despite the sunshine, it is going to feel cold. Winds perhaps a little bit lighter than today, but still chilly.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Jules Buckley. Scotland, firstly, the A9 in Perth anchoring Ross around Ballinluig. Now that is closed off and queuing at the scene of a multi-vehicle collision. We're heading towards Crowdon, that's the Woodhead Road, the A6024 in Derbyshire. It's shut between the Holmfirth turnoff and Greenfield Road. There's snow there. Hope under Dinmore in Herefordshire, between there and Wellington, the A49 closed both ways, a collision being investigated. If you're heading from Wales towards England, the M4, the Prince of Wales Bridge still closed off, queuing back to junction 24 at the Caldera for emergency repairs. A40 London Greenford into town at the flyover, queuing back to Northolt. Traffic at a stand for a police incident. Very busy in Westminster and Parliament Square. Whitehall closed because of the ongoing farmers' protest. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 37 minutes past 2. Now, of course, much more to come on Good Afternoon, Britain. But before then, let's check in with Martin Daubney. Martin, of course, you're live from 3. You're in the thick of it. You're in our Westminster studio. What's coming up?
Well, I've been wading through a soggy army of farmers on my way to the studio today, and today I'll be joined by about 20 of them in Westminster, including father and son combo Clive and Henry Bailey. Yesterday, Henry came into the studio and I said to him, what would you like to ask the Prime Minister? He said, I'd like to reconsider what you've done. Well, Chris Hope, our political editor, put Henry's question to the Prime Minister in Rio. Today, Henry will get the answer. I'll be joined by arable farmers who know their onions. I'll be joined by dairy farmers who think everything has gone sour. Sheep farmers who will not have the wool pulled over their eyes anymore, roaring defiantly. I'll also be joined by the president of the World Farmers Organization, a Frenchman, to give a few tips on how the Gilets jaunes won in France. Is it time for something like that here? Of course, today went with remarkable peace. Plus, as the deep freeze hits Britain, I'll be joined by the leader of the pensionervote.com, looking at the double whammy of rural constituencies with lots of pensioners. Could there be a political nightmare in that for the Labour Party? It's International Men's Day. It's an everyday International Men's Day, I hear you cry. No, it's not. It's today, November the 19th. I'll be joined by Mark Brooks, OBE, the international ambassador in the studio. And is it any wonder that gin and tonic has replaced tea as the nation's favourite tipper? I don't know about you at the moment, but I feel like drowning my sorrows. All coming up 3 till 6.
Wow, what a jam-packed show. I mean, my goodness me. Martin, I knew you were a man of continental tastes. I knew you were a man who loves all things European, but taking tips from the French, even for you, that might be a bit of a step forward.
I'm quite disappointed that you're not wearing a flat cap there, Martin. I think you better rectify that before 3 o'clock.
Oh, there you go. There's a challenge.
I've got my wellies on.
Oh,
fantastic stuff. See you at 3 o'clock.
Well, meanwhile, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer is in Brazil at day 2 of the G20 World Leaders Summit.
Yes, Sir Keir Starmer says Ukraine is at the top of the agenda, but perhaps should he be looking a little closer to home?
Well, let's go live now to Rio de Janeiro to speak to GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Christopher, we saw the interview you did earlier with Keir Starmer covering the farmers' protests and Ukraine. Does the Prime Minister have any real sense of how big these protests have become in London?
Yeah, hi Tom, hi Miriam. Welcome back to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, where the PM is here, of course, at the G20 summit, winding up today. He's been meeting with Modi from India, Xi from China, a brush by, a quick handshake with President Biden in Leaders' Suite. So lots of chats here about the big issues facing the globe, not least Ukraine and those 6 missiles fired deep into the heart of Russian territory today by Ukraine. Now, we asked him in our interview, didn't we, for GB News, will the UK allow UK missiles to be fired by Ukraine into Russia? He wouldn't comment on security matters, but very quickly I took him straight to the issue affecting so many GB News viewers and listeners, which is the farmers' protests in London today. It made very clear that, are you aware of the anger? And he did say repeatedly how he gets it, and surprisingly, you might argue, he gave a bit more about his farming heritage. He said his first job was on a farm. He grew up in the countryside, he said, and all my entire family live in the countryside. Farmer Starmer, if you like, he donned the flat cap and adopted the language of those people demonstrating along with Jeremy Clarkson outside Parliament this afternoon. So some would say, raise an eyebrow at that. We thought his dad was a toolmaker, but it seems also he has some connections, some growing up in the countryside too. He said despite all that, despite knowing those concerns of farming, he's not going to change the rules. He maintains that families can avoid inheritance tax up to £3 million if the couple are married and they use a spousal allowance, and after that it's 20% paid over 7 years. So the government is staying firm on this, but at some point I do wonder whether they might worry that the money they're saving for the NHS, and he made that point, by the way, farmers use the NHS, use public services, but the money that they're saving from that, is that really worth the damage being done to this government's reputation in the countryside?
Huge issue, of course, because the Labour government is supported now by a record number of Labour MPs from rural backgrounds, around 100 of them. We've heard one MP, the Labour MP for South West Norfolk, the MP who unexpectedly unseated Liz Truss, has started asking questions of the Treasury over their calculations. I mean, could we see potentially a bit of a rebellion from some Labour MPs over this?
Well, no question, this isn't really, in the old language of the past 14 years, a kind of countryside against urban Labour issue, although I did ask the PM whether he felt he was too urban. Baroness Melieu, who is a Labour peer who chairs, or is president, I think, of the Countryside Alliance, which represents rural pursuits, I did ask him whether he recognised that, and that's why he came out with his defence and why he's a man of the countryside. But yeah, it's definitely a battle, I think, for Labour MPs and also Lib Dem MPs in the southwest, not really the Conservatives in the same way, although they are the party historically of hunting, shooting, fishing, of course, but only 121 of them left. So they will be facing a lot of heat, I think, internally in the party over this controversial policy.
Thank you, Christopher. Fascinating to hear from you there. And that's Christopher Hope live from Rio de Janeiro, where the G20 has entered its second day.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and there's plenty more coming up on today's programme, including a story that we've been trying to get to all day, but have been rather snowed under with other news, to coin a phrase. Many parts of the UK have woken up to snow this morning. The Met Office says the country is getting its very first taste of winter.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
In 2020, after almost 80 years, Oxford University's Pitt Rivers Museum removed its famous collection of shrunken heads with sewn-up lips and eyes made by the South American Shuar and Ashwar people. How do museums decide what should be shown and what should be confined to storage? Can controversial exhibits be left on display with suitable contextualisation in captions? Who would want to be a curator facing such controversial questions? For review, I'm delighted to be joined by journalist Eitan Smallman. Welcome to GB News. I think many people, when they hear that we're going to discuss museums or art galleries, think that it's going to be, that wokery question. But it strikes me, and I think it strikes you too, that this is not just about wokery at all. There are some really interesting ethical questions here. For example, let's start with this one, and there are several examples of it. Should we be displaying human bodies, the remains of human beings? Should we be displaying them in museums?
Absolutely. It's not just the usual suspects, young snowflakes, who are objecting to these things. They're just naturally cultural shifts, and people of all ages and all political persuasions may feel uneasy about displaying human remains of any kind, especially human remains that have been taken against the will of the communities or taken violently. Hilary Mantel led a campaign to remove a 7-foot 7-inch skeleton of Charles Byrne, known as the Irish Giant, from the Hunterian Museum. He had specifically said that he didn't want to be displayed and didn't want to be taken by anatomists, and yet was displayed for a couple of hundred years until a couple of years ago. He hasn't had the burial he requested, but he's no longer on public display.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
This is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is nearly 10 to 3, and the UK is bracing for travel chaos as heavy snow and icy conditions have gripped large parts of the country. Well, the Met Office has issued 3 yellow weather warnings, with up to 20 centimetres of snow expected on higher ground and significant disruptions predicted for road and rail travel.
Yes, freezing temperatures as low as -3 degrees centigrade have led to train cancellations and road closures. National Highways has issued an amber alert for key motorways, so you're keeping track of that. Yellow weather warning, amber alert for the motorways. What are all these colour schemes about?
Very complicated. Well, let's cross over now to GB News Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley, who is joining us live from Sheffield, where I was born and lived till recently. Lots of snow there, Anna. Are the schools closed? Are the roads being disrupted?
Yes, well, good afternoon to you both and welcome to the Steel City, which, as you can see, has been completely blanketed in snow. Nearby schools have been forced to close due to the wintry weather conditions. One local school just down the road has shut, and the children have been making use of the day off. I've seen plenty of them throwing snowballs and making snowmen, but it's not just here in Sheffield and Yorkshire, of course, where we've had those school closures. Almost 200 schools across England and Wales have been forced to shut due to the snow, and it comes as we've had the yellow weather warning from the Met Office for snow and ice. That's covered large swathes of the North, the Midlands, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, and the advice from these weather warnings is that vehicles could be stranded, power cuts may occur and rural areas could be cut off. And you mentioned transport links as well. Well, certainly thousands of rail passengers have had their journeys disrupted or cancelled due to these wintry weather conditions. It's also impacted bus travel here in Sheffield. One bus was actually stranded on the road due to the icy conditions, and it's impacted tram transport as well. The UK Health Security Agency has also issued its first amber cold weather health alert of the season, warning conditions could be dangerous for vulnerable people, including the elderly. A severe snow alert in place for motorways across the UK as temperatures plunged overnight last night. Well, to keep motorists moving on the roads, the gritters and snow ploughs across the UK have been out in force. Earlier I was speaking to Councillor Keane Duncan. He's the executive member for transport at North Yorkshire Council. They've got a huge job on their hands because North Yorkshire is England's largest county, encapsulates some real rural areas, and it's got a road network spanning more than 5,800 miles. This is what Councillor Keane Duncan said about the gritting efforts and the winter plan.
Our winter operation is in full swing. We're working around the clock to keep our roads open and safe for the North Yorkshire public. We have a team of 200 people involved in our winter maintenance programme, 100 gritters, snow blowers, farming contractors as well, who are working to support us in the most remotest parts of our very vast county. We're very proud of our winter programme, spending £8 million every year, gritting over 50% of our entire road network.
Keane Duncan there on the plan for North Yorkshire on the roads, and certainly temperatures are cold. It's 2 degrees here. I'm pretty freezing, I can tell you myself. I can't quite feel my feet at the moment, but it was even lower overnight in Scotland. Temperatures actually reached -7.8 Celsius in Tulloch Bridge in the Scottish Highlands in the early hours of Monday, which is the lowest temperature the UK has seen since last winter, and the cold snap is continuing to set in this week, plunging across the UK, with the Midlands, Wales and north of England all experiencing near freezing conditions. And there's a further yellow weather warning for snow and ice that's been put in place from 6 o'clock tonight until 12 o'clock tomorrow, covering the East Midlands, east of England, north east England, Yorkshire and the Humber and south west Scotland. So wrap up if you're going out, it's certainly cold.
No, very, very good advice. Wise advice there, Anna Riley. Thank you very much for that. And, of course, that yellow weather warning, we must remember it. Steer clear of the yellow snow.
Also good advice there, Tom. Well, we've had lots of viewers send in their snowy videos and photos. Here's Annie's shot from Leicester.
Oh, snowy rooftops there. This from VJ, who lives in the Midlands, of a lovely snowy garden.
Also got a video in from Deborah. Look at that in the early morning by the look of it.
Oh, it's always fun to have a look at that in the morning. And Jim in Darwin has this gorgeous shot of the countryside.
Yeah, look at those beautiful snowy fields. Hopefully people are sledging on there. Or Gail from Nottingham. That looks quite deep there, doesn't it, in her garden?
Yeah, you could make a snowman or two out of that.
Absolutely. Well, please do send more of your snowy pictures coming in. We've got a few more coming. Wow, that's very pretty. Snow actually
Brian
falling.
in Staffordshire. It could be a Christmas card there, really.
And Janet has sent this one in from Congleton. Beautiful sun coming up.
Daryl sends his pictures from Worcestershire as well.
Gosh, it's got quite far west there, hasn't it? Well, talking of the environment, I believe the Environment Secretary, Steve Reid, is now at the DEFRA Select Committee in Parliament. He's been answering questions from backbench MPs, of course, particularly about the farmers' protests.
This isn't Steve Reid, though. This is Alistair Carmichael.
Who is the chair of the committee. And
from inheritance tax.
Well,
that's pretty much in line with some of the suggestions of the ROC review. Do you think you've missed an opportunity here to encourage more tenancies to be extended, which has surely got to be something that would be good?
Well, I think there are things we could do to improve business opportunities for tenants, and that's why we've announced our intention to create the new position of a tenant farming commissioner. The point of that role would be to improve collaboration between the tenant farmer and the landowner to ensure that the code of practice for tenant farming is properly enforced, to be an advocate for tenant farming to government and to other agencies, and to provide appropriate advice both to tenant farmers and to their landlords. So there are changes we are making that I think will help.
Tough day for the Environment Secretary there. Select committee appearance, protests outside, meetings, and of course 2 farmers sitting behind him, watching every move.
Indeed. Join us tomorrow. Goodbye from us for now.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. A lot of cold weather around at the moment. Yes, sunny skies for some of us too, but also quite a few sleet and snow showers. Pushing in on a brisk northerly wind, and it's on this northerly wind that we're also dragging in that cold Arctic air, which is why temperatures are so far below average for the time of year. As we go through the rest of today, we will see a bit more cloud, a few outbreaks of rain across the far south clearing away, and then a lot of dry, clear weather for many of us, but plenty of wintry showers across parts exposed to that brisk northerly wind, so northern parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, down the western side of Wales, and also down the eastern part of the country too. Some very low temperatures with clear skies tonight. We are going to wake up to a harsh frost. The lowest temperatures will be across parts of Scotland. Last night it fell to -11. It could be even colder than that tonight, especially in places where there's some lying snow. Also watch out for some icy patches, especially where there are wintry showers. Also watch out for icy patches and some snow accumulations over parts of Northern Ireland. Mostly dry for inland areas, but both towards western and eastern fringes there will be the risk of some wintry showers, and these could cause some problems as we go through morning rush hour. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow, we will continue to see some showers piling down on that relatively strong northerly wind. Most inland areas will avoid the showers, though they will penetrate quite far inland at times because of the brisk wind. That brisk wind is also going to make it feel pretty cold. These temperatures are well below average for the time of year. Even though there will be quite a bit of sunshine around, it really is going to feel quite raw. Little change as we go through the evening and overnight Wednesday into Thursday. Again, another cold, widely frosty night for many of us, and still some wintry showers to watch out for. Chance of some unsettled weather in the southwest on Thursday, and then by the weekend, things could be very wet and windy indeed. Bye-bye.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of